listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Is it coming home or is it going to Rome? Broadcasting, well, the Euro Championship final is being played. Well, I guess we'll have an American audience and those few people who have no interest in football. We'll be talking about who won in the Afghan war with the great Hedges. Turns out that after 20 years and all that blood and treasure, the same people that ran it before the war will run it by the end of the war again. And we'll be talking about the coronavirus in advance of Freedom Day. Is it on, still on, or is it not? And how did leaders as obtuse as the American and British leaders manage to get the rollout of the vaccination so well, considering how badly they'd done everything else? And we'll be talking about British politics, American politics. It's the mother of all talk shows, after all. It's the Open University of the Airwaves. It's the College of Knowledge. And you don't have to pay any tuition fees. So, it's rock and roll radio with pictures. Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
It is the mother of all talk shows. You can listen in crystal clarity on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. 105.5 are the numbers there. Retune if you're in D.C. And you can listen on AM radio right across the United States from Burning City to Burning City. You can listen all over the world thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. 500,000 people, more than 500,000 people last week watched as well as listened to the show. So if you're watching now on Facebook, please share it with every one of your friends. You can watch on my Facebook page and on RT's multiple Facebook pages. Ditto on YouTube. And if you are watching on my YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, which is now over 100,000 strong, but I'm still waiting for YouTube to give me the award which other people get for getting over 100,000 subscribers. Perhaps it's lost in the post. But you can also watch on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, as an amazing number of you do. You can watch on Instagram and on Twitch and on Telegram and goodness knows how many other platforms. Now, I'm not so stupid as not to know that some of you will be switching over at 8 o'clock to watch the football match between England and Italy, the build-up to which is well underway. And I can tell you there are some boisterous scenes in famous London landmarks. I'll speak again in a minute about that. But you can also, of course, watch back after the game, late at night if you're disappointed in the result, or tomorrow when you are in recovery from a great result. Now, I'm supporting England tonight. England is not my national team. But I am British, so there's that. And England is not just a part, but the major part of the island on which I was born and have lived all of my life. There's the fact that the England football team is a near perfect representation of what Britain now looks like and has managed to unify all the different minority and majority communities here on this island. I'm leaving Scotland out of that for a minute. They get a special mention later in my monologue. But the English people have come together around Gareth Southgate's England team like at no other time in our history. It helps that some of our very best players are black, but some of our very best players are white, and they all seem to love each other very much indeed. I've seen video and pictures of British people of Indian descent, of Pakistani descent, children in a madrasa. I've seen people like The Voice, the black newspaper in London, celebrate the black players in the team, wish England well. There's that for national unity, because I love my country, you see, and I want it to do well. And precondition for it doing well is that we have national unity. There's the fact that for more than half my life I have not only lived in England, but prospered in England. The English people have twice elected me to Parliament, me, a foreigner. They elected without once ever mentioning the fact that England was not my native land. There's the fact that 5 of my 6 children were born in England. There's the fact that most of my work and my customers and my followers and my supporters are in England. There's the fact that the players in the England team, among them are my actual footballing heroes, and not just footballing. Arise, Sir Marcus Rashford, the champion of poor children, who did so much to force the Tory government's backing down over depriving the poorest children in our land of free school meals during the summertime. But I thrill every week, every weekend, to the exploits of Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw and Marcus Rashford and Sancho and Sterling, and perhaps above all, Harry Kane, the quintessential Englishman, like an Englishman from another age, like an Englishman from the Tiger comics, kind of man that if you had to be in a trench, you'd want standing right next to you. There's all of that. But above all, I want to say that the auto-enmity of other people towards the England football team is as ugly a thing as I have ever seen. There's banter and there's ugliness. And the ugliness of the anyone but England brigade, which includes some people close to me, not 10 yards from me right at this minute, is an ugly and juvenile thing. We live here. Why would we not want a team from here to prosper in the European Football Championships? Why would we not want players that we cheer on and marvel at to do well? Because they're wearing their national shirts. What would that make us if so? All these Scottish people evincing hate against England would be better getting angry with the Scottish football authorities who have so miserably presided over Scotland's footballing fate. I went to the World Cup in Frankfurt in Germany in 1974 when Scotland had one of the best football teams in the world. What happened? How did we go from that to this? I played football from the age of 5 years old in Scotland. We were taught football by the primary school teachers. Now, all these decades later, we're still taught football by the school teachers. Why aren't our children receiving the kind of coaching, on the kind of pitches, in the kind of halls that the children of Denmark, to name just one, are? Or the Netherlands, are. Other small countries with small populations have prospered mightily at the football, but Scotland, which along with England was the home of football, is in such a parlous state. So get angry with those running your own parish rather than evincing your small country syndrome against your neighbours. Good neighbourliness is, after all, a holy thing. It's not just holy, it is actually common sense. That's not to say that my kind of patriotism overlooks the blunders and crimes that my own country has committed. Who could seriously, credibly accuse me of that? The reason we've got all these black players in the England team, I don't need to describe, do I? Do I need to tell you how these black people got here? How they got to the Caribbean in the first place? Do I? I'm not one to overlook the blunders and the crimes of Britain. But those blunders and crimes were not committed by the ordinary Joe and Joanne in Britain's cities. There was no white privilege down the coal mines or in the mills. There was no white privilege enjoyed by the barefooted child labour that was still working in Britain until the late years of the 19th century. There was no white privilege amongst my ancestors, ploughing land and toiling in jute and flax mills. No white privilege at all. No crime or blunder was committed by them, but by our rulers, who overwhelmingly enjoyed the fruits of those crimes and blunders. And there have been too many, many without number. I could not find the time in this show to adumbrate them all, but I need to turn to just one of them. Next Saturday, on the anniversary of the death of Dr. David Kelly, the British weapons scientist, the professional inspector of other people's weapons, who appeared in a blaze of publicity in front of a House of Commons committee and only hours later was found dead in the woods as he had earlier predicted he would be. It's David Kelly's death anniversary, and it is the occasion of the premiere of the film that I have made with the great Irish director Sean Murray called Killing Kelly, which will be available to you all instantly by download, by DVD. And I hope that many of you will avail yourself of it, not just because it investigates the crime that was committed against Dr. David Kelly, but even more importantly than that, it investigates the bigger crime of which this was a part. The crime committed by the Labour government of Tony Blair. The Labour government of Tony Blair, paid for by the Labour Chancellor. Whatever it takes, he said. Gordon Brown, prosecuted by the war criminals, Jeff Hoon, and many, many others in that Labour cabinet, and spun and lied for by the Labour liars, the Goebbels to Tony Blair, Alastair Campbell, and the rest of his team, about whom much more later in my legal action in connection with the Batley by-election, the crime that was committed by this country against the people of Afghanistan and Iraq was just the latest of Britain's rulers' long list of imperial crimes. But it was one of the most egregious, one of the most costly. 1 million people have died and counting. Extremism and fanaticism has been cascaded across the whole world. The Iraq War isn't over yet, and the consequences of it will be felt by the youngest child in the family of the youngest person watching or listening to this evening. I've told you before, I will never give up, and after me, my sons and my daughters, seeking justice and accountability for the killers of Kelly, for the killers of 1 million Iraqis, for the killers of an uncountable number of Afghans, of Libyans, of Syrians, of Yemenis. And all of these are just the 21st century crimes of colonialism, of imperialism. The United States has now stolen out of Afghanistan like a thief in the night, scuttling like the last days of Saigon from their ill-gotten gains. Clambering aboard aircraft are the comprador of the foreign occupation of Afghanistan, desperately running across the border of Tajikistan. The obscurantist savages of the Taliban, whom we overthrew in 2001, are back in 2021 as obscurantist, and I have no doubt as savage as they were. What was it all about? The Labour Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said in early 2002 in the British Parliament, with me sitting just few yards from him, that our soldiers may be home by Christmas. And when I rose to tell him our soldiers will not be home 10 Christmases hence, he laughed. He invited the House to laugh. Oh, how they laughed. But of course, my prediction was a massive underestimate. Our soldiers are still there 20 years after they went there. Dr. John Reid, Tony Blair's Minister for War and many other things, said that we might be able to go to Helmand province and return without a shot being fired. But hundreds of our young people left their life's blood in the sand there. Thousands of our young people were mutilated and disabled there. Tens of thousands have been mentally affected by their time there, and I speak only in this case of the British armed forces that were sent. In the case of the United States, the toll is much, much larger. I told Tony Blair, nobody has successfully occupied. Alexander the Great did not successfully occupy Afghanistan, and you, sir, are no Alexander the Great. The empire has now lost 3 wars in Afghanistan. But the criminals who made that crime and that blunder are still around. They didn't lose their positions. In many cases, they have greater office and certainly far greater wealth than they did when they began the crimes that they began. That's what's wrong with Britain. Not just that we committed crimes, but that the criminals go unpunished, indeed go rewarded mightily for their crimes, while the poor bloody infantry leave their life's blood on the ground. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, because it's the mother of all talk shows. Now, question one of George's general knowledge. On this day in 1969, David Bowie released the single Space Oddity. What happened 9 days later? A, he was arrested for drugs. That could have happened. B, his son Zowie Bowie was born. Is he still called Zowie Bowie, really? Or C, Apollo 11 landed on the moon? The answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Time, weather, and highways.
Now, don't forget, you can download the podcast of this program, a finely edited highlights version of this 3-hour epic. It's being listened to now all around the world. Huge numbers are downloading the, as it were, compact version of the show. Of course, in the UK and the US, but listen to these countries that downloaded it last week: Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Switzerland, UAE, and Hong Kong in China. All of those had significant audiences of last week's show. Search Moats, M-O-A-T-S, on the app where you get your podcast from.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
On this day in 1969, David Bowie released the single Space Oddity, a pretty special track, I'm sure you'll agree. And 9 days later, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Or in a film studio in Hollywood, as some allege. Now, here's the first poll of the evening. Who has got the best national anthem? A, Britain. B, Russia. C, Italy. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Why don't you? Now, Patrick Christys gets an order. He gets a special award for appearing tonight, because he's as big a football fan as me, but I've got to be here. He doesn't, but he is. It's Patrick Christys, the journalist and broadcaster. Patrick, I know you've got one eye on another screen. I'll try not to detain you for too long. But let's deal first with the mania, actually, that is now unfolding outside Wembley and at the train stations and in Leicester Square. Is this just boys being boys, or is this something quite extraordinary that has taken grip in this country as England have progressed to this important final?
Well, I think it's both, George. Firstly, I would just like to say sorry, obviously, because I would normally on later, but I could have missed the chance that football would come home. So sorry about that. But yes, no, I think it's both, actually. I think the fact is we've been cooped up now, haven't we, for about 60 months or so, and that's been a bit ridiculous. So I think there's an explosion of a bit of that going on. But what I would also say is it's great the fact that England have got this far, and I think that's what we're also seeing, which is that people now feel free for the first time, and also for the first time in a long time, this country has been unified. This country in England has been unified, because we've been tearing ourselves apart, haven't we? Whether it was Brexit or whatever. And now we've got an opportunity to come together. And I think unashamedly so, the fact that we're also led by a bloke who looks like if he wasn't England manager, he'd be a painter decorator. The rest of them, if Declan Rice wasn't playing in midfield, he'd be delivering stuff for Amazon. And I love a bit of that. I've not heard the word wag once. We've got no David Beckhams. We've got no Jamie Redknapp. I mean, he wouldn't be playing anyway. He'd have pulled his hamstring doing a Gaviscon commercial. So it's irrelevant. We've got a bunch of normal lads who are in the final of a competition. This is the first time I've been born. and we can all get behind that, George.
Yes, I agree with every bit of that. It's WAG-free, it's white suit-free, it's Champagne Charlie-free. Well, Jack Grealish looks as if he might be a bit Champagne Charlie, but I think he's one of the most brilliant players I've ever seen. He's, to me, like Rodney Marsh, he's like Stan Bowles, he's something from another age. And I really hope he gets on the park tonight. But it is a group of working class lads. A good number of them black.
Yes, exactly that. It's a modern Britain in a sense. Don't get me wrong.
This is what Britain looks like.
It is what Britain looks like, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and drink the Kool-Aid and say that I think, oh, isn't it so great that this is the kind of reflection of modern Britain, in a sense of all of the lads who are playing tonight and every single person in the squad is there on merit. There's no positive discrimination when it comes to the England football team. It happens to be a very representative group of people. And I think when you get the likes of Jess Phillips saying like, oh, well, my 4-year-old son, which obviously didn't happen, by the way, my 4-year-old son asked me, why are there no players with double-barreled surnames? Well, I imagine Calvert-Lewin might have a word about that, or Trent Alexander-Arnold. But it's a point, which is that this, for me, feels very normal. And I think the likes of Raheem Sterling, he did make a point, as much as I would rail against the idea that Britain is institutionally racist, and there's a debate about that. I would disagree with it. However, he made a very good point, which is that when he bought a massive house for his mum, there was an article in The Sun about the fact that here's a young black man spending his money too frivolously. However, when Phil Foden did it for his dad, who likes to go carp fishing in Stockport and is white, everyone was like, what a nice guy Phil Foden is. And so actually, I think this has done more to bring this country together than otherwise. I do think as well that whilst you're absolutely bob on, I just don't want too much to be made about that. These are the best 11 footballers and indeed 22 footballers, however big the squad is, that this country has to offer, regardless of colour, creed, religion.
Yes, but because it is representative, every section of our population can see themselves on the park, can identify with the squad. I've seen pictures, videos of 100 boys in Islamic garb watching England in their madrasa and exploding with joy as England's goal went in. I've seen Sikhs, Indians, Afro-Caribbean people dancing in the street for England. This is a truly wonderful thing. Why would anyone be churlish about it? Double-barreled names. I mean, there is actually, as you pointed out, although he's not played yet, I don't think, Calvert-Lewin, a very fine player too. But this is the British working class on the football field. What's not to love, Patrick?
Yeah, it's a proper team as well. And the idea that Gareth Southgate, so I read an interesting article today about Gareth Southgate. There seems to be an implication just because he's relatively well-spoken and he's obviously white as well. And I think he's from somewhere in Sussex, that he's in some way middle class. Actually, the rest of his family, apart from his parents and where he was brought up, were from kind of like the East End in London. So Gareth Southgate is actually quite working class himself as well. And the best thing that I read about him today was that in his school, which is unusual for any school that I've seen, certainly in that era, it wasn't compulsory to wear a school tie. And he was the only person in his school who consistently, even as a child, turned up in a school tie. Now,
and a waistcoat, probably.
I thought, yeah, under waistcoat, exactly, yeah, and he probably got expelled for that because that definitely wasn't in the school uniform. But no, I think it's fantastic, and I think it's very representative, and that's magnificent. I also think there's a working ethic. We take the working class out of it. Now there's no big-time Charlies in it. Now I'm a massive fan of it as a Manchester United fan. Your David Beckhams, your Paul Scholes, your Wayne Rooney. There were numerous times, for example, when we got beaten by Iceland or when we drew with Algeria or, frankly, literally any other time, where it looked to me like a collection of incredibly talented footballers, arguably more talented, your Frank Lampards, than what we have now, who were all playing as individuals. And what we have now is a group of people who are not just willing, but actually prefer to play as part of a team, even if, like Jack Grealish, for all the kind of big, which I don't agree with, by the way, for all the big-time Charlie allegations that he might have against him, is perfectly willing and perfectly happy to come on for 20 minutes, do a job, come off again, and at the end of the day, you all get the same medal, George. You all get the same medal, and that's what they're after.
Quite. Is anything else happening in Britain?
There's anything else happening in Britain. Have you heard that Matt Hancock's making a comeback?
Really? So soon?
So what he's done is he's personally seen at least 5 cabinet ministers and former colleagues, as he calls them, and he's interviewed them about whether or not he can make a comeback. Now, from what I've heard, 3 of those have said, Matt, you need to actually resign as an MP. So that's a resounding no. The other 2 of them have said, well, you need to wait your time. Now, there was a source close to Matt Hancock, which was Matt Hancock, who said Matt Hancock will do a very good job as a good backbench MP. Now, my noises that I'm hearing is that he's going to have to go at the next general election. The issue is that I don't think he will, and so the Tory party might actively have to deselect him, which is quite interesting. Also, as an interesting aside, Gina Coladangio, who he obviously had an affair with, was pictured the other day without her wedding ring, but holding an Olivia Bonas is the North London way of saying it, Oliver Bonas handbag, which I thought was, if I was Matt Hancock, I'd say, do you mind ditching your ex's stuff, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure if ditching the multi-millionaire Olivier Bonas for the ex-backbench MP Matt Hancock was the best move. We'll see if it lasts. What about Keir Starmer? What about the chief of our health service, the head of SAGE today at the tennis without a mask on? What about Keir Starmer in a pub with no alcohol around him, no drinks of any kind around him, without a mask on? Is all this hypocrisy beginning to break down now?
Well, Keir Starmer is currently at Wembley. So Keir Starmer is right now, as we speak, at Wembley because he got 2 free tickets to go to Wembley. So for a person who actively came out and said that he didn't necessarily think that Wembley should be full of people, to accept 2 free tickets does not help with the old adage, which isn't true, but people on the right may say, oh, classic lefty always got his hand out. Well, to be fair, he was pretty quick to rip off the bloke's hand who said, you know, have 2 tickets to Wembley. And I think this is the issue, but it's not just the politicians, although they are the main ones because they're elected and that's why it matters. But your Piers Morgans of this world, when Piers Morgan was saying we should all have more restrictions, he went to Antigua over Christmas with his family. He was at Wembley the other night. You've got Holly and Phil off of this morning at Wimbledon. Dr. Hilary Jones, who's been at Wimbledon as well, maskless, he's openly said that we should all wear masks in public. Now, the problem that I have with this is not the fact that they're not wearing masks there. I'm not a big believer in the restrictions, so that's not my issue. My issue is the hypocrisy. And I think that if you're on TV every single day, there was a poll that came out this week that said 70% of people would like restrictions to remain in place once COVID is over. Right, and it's because of people like that who they see every single day on their TV screen. Holly and Phil, you could drive a bus through them. They're sat that far apart on this morning. But when they go to Wimbledon, they're next to each other posting selfies. Now, that's the issue that I have, which is that they influence people and their Project Fear, in my book, George, they're the kind of Project Fear of it all. And I think that's wrong, you know?
Now, I've seen that poll and other polls. If true, and polls are not always true. The Batley poll put me at 6%. I got 22%. They don't always genuinely represent opinion, but if true, is it going to be possible for Boris Johnson to strike out boldly later this month when he wanted to end all these restrictions?
No, I don't think so for a few different reasons. So the fact that Matt Hancock did what he did with his top aide, and by did what he did, I mean have an affair with her, that's a massive problem. The G7 issue is a problem because they didn't have masks on there. Boris Johnson didn't have a mask on in his taxi when he came back from the semi-final, for example. On top of that, so your politicians can't tell you what to do anymore. They can't. They've lost the authority. Your celebrity figures, like your Holly and Phils, your Dr. Hilary Joneses, your Piers Morgans, they can't tell you what to do anymore. So your public kind of facing figures can't either. But also, the fact is there was an article today on the front of the Telegraph that 13 million people are projected now to be on an NHS waiting list going forward. Now, I think what's going to happen is the fact that when people realise that they can't get basic cancer treatment or they can't even get a hernia operation, they're going to start asking, well, hang on a minute, at what point do we prioritise COVID over everything else? And so no is my answer to that. I do not see how politically, publicly or rationally Boris Johnson or indeed anyone else can going forward impose any more restrictions for any longer than they already are.
Well, we'll be talking to Moats medic Dr. Ranjeet Brar very shortly about that. Patrick, I hope you enjoy the game. I hope your team wins. But I can't wait for the Premiership to start. Sancho is an exciting signing, and there are all kinds of others in the pipeline. My last question to you is this. Can't we buy Jack Grealish?
Yeah. Well, if City don't get him first, I suppose the old adage was if Fergie was in charge, it wouldn't matter. But I think it does matter now. So I would quite like to get Grealish. But I think if we've got Sancho, I'd quite like to do them anyway. I think if Grealish might struggle at City under Guardiola when he's not the big cheese, as much as it pains me to say it, because if you buy Grealish, I think you should buy him at a club where you're going to play him all the time. You should give him the number 7, give him the glory. And I don't think he's going to get that at City. Come to United, Josh. Jack even, sorry.
That's my message also. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. Enjoy the game. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, look at that poll. Who's got the best national anthem? Britain, 35%. Really? Russia, 24%. Really? Italy, 41%. I'm not sure I've ever heard the Italian one. I'll listen to it during the break. But how you can prefer the Russian national anthem, the British national anthem over the Russian national anthem is complete nonsense. The Russian national anthem, along with the French, incidentally, who are not even in this poll, are the most stirring national anthems of them all. And the British is undoubtedly the worst. Billy Connolly was right when he suggested the theme tune from the Archers would be a better national anthem than the dirge of God Save the Queen. Forgive me, ma'am, long life to you. It's no disrespect. Anyway, you can vote who's got the best national anthem. A, Britain, B, Russia, C, Italy, on my Twitter feed. Now, George's general knowledge. Here's a topical one, a football one. This was the week in 1998 that France won its first World Cup, beating Brazil 3-0. Who scored 2 goals? A, Zinedine Zidane, B, Stefan Guivarich, C, Emmanuel Petit. There's your question. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson SatNav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, no, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on. Yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
And the answer, of course, is Zinedine Zidane. What a player, what a man, what a name. So great a name, I called my first son after him. Who's got the best national anthem? A, Britain, B, Russia, C, Italy. I'm still in shock at the reports of the vote there. Now, are we hurtling towards a new coronavirus crisis, or will we just have to live with it now that most of us have got the jab? Who better to ask than Moats medic Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who again very kindly has forsworn the football to join us here on the mother of all talk shows. Dr. Ranjeet, welcome. Let's talk first of all about the plans that the government has, can they survive the rocketing rates of infection? Or are they balanced by those rocketing rates, balanced by the rocketing rates of waiting lists and other opportunity cost to the NHS, and the fact that the injections mean that we're almost certainly not going to die even if we catch it? What's your view on that?
George, great to be back with you. Congratulations, by the way, on your outstanding result in Batley and Spain. I've not seen you since then, but that was truly magnificent. Perhaps we can talk about that another time. It's
not over yet, by the way.
Glad to hear it. Nor should it be. But on this question, I have friends and relatives who are on the skeptical side of the COVID debate, and they're always accusing me of hyping it up. COVID was a very real disease, and it still is a very real disease if you're living in Indonesia, if you're living in India, they're coming to the end of their way. But, it has caused 5 million deaths or more probably around the world. But right now in Britain, I think we have to be driven by the data and recognise what is happening now. We have reached the point where over 90% of the population have antibodies. We have reached the point where 2/3 of the adult population have had 2 doses of vaccine. And if we look at the, increasing rates of infection, with the Delta virus, we can see that probably we're getting to the 30,000 cases recorded a day. If we look back and see from the second wave of infections, what was the death rate when we had that number of infections? Well, actually, it was on the 27th of December, and we had almost 1,000 deaths on that day, with an average running then at 500 and increasing. We don't have anything like that now. We have, kind of average 10, and the rates are going up and down around that, but really very low rates. So that whereas at that time of the second wave, COVID was actually the leading cause of death in the country. 2/3 of the hospital, 1/3 of the, almost half of the beds nationwide were filled with patients with COVID. And some hospitals in the southeast at the centres of the epidemic were kind of 2/3 full. We have again got nothing like those rates of occupancy. We've got very few cases in hospital and very few deaths. So actually, all of this is showing that we have effectively uncoupled the rate of COVID infection from the worst effects of the disease. It was always a disease which was really skewed in its effect depending on age. And the vast majority of the deaths were in the over 70s, certainly the over 60s. If you're over 85, then the death rate became over 10%, maybe 15%. It's a huge rate of potential death. All of that section of the population who want to have the vaccine, and that's the vast majority of them, it's well over 95%, have had the vaccine. So at this point, we essentially have protected the nation from COVID, including the Delta variant. And I cannot see the logic anymore in pretending that we're using pandemic measures. The pandemic measures were very poorly used. The reason we had lockdown is because our hospitals lack capacity. Nothing has been done to address that. Billions has been given in support to businesses for something else entirely, not the COVID pandemic, but the effects of a global recession, which also hit us at the same time. Billions has been squandered on track and trace and isolate, which was done very poorly. But the one thing that we have done, the NHS has done, is roll out a vaccination program, which essentially has done the job. And for that reason, the population is overwhelmingly protected from the effects of COVID in the UK, not globally. Globally, it's still a problem. And so for me, it's time to stop the pandemic measures and proceed with the relaxation as planned. Whether that will happen is a political matter. The Labour Party and seemingly the left wing, so-called, in the country seem to be agitating very heavily. They've got into the habit, it seems, of criticising the government for this, but they're not really taking account of the new situation, in my opinion, George.
Neither are they practising what they preach, as I just discussed with Patrick Christys. Keir Starmer, who is demanding that the restrictions are kept on and on and on, is himself for the second time in a week at Wembley Stadium with 70,000 people and no mask, and taking selfies with strangers up close and personal. and many other political figures and media figures like Piers Morgan, who are endlessly agitating for endless restrictions, except for themselves. This is all breaking down, at least in terms of its credibility, Doctor.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think people are fed up. I mean, if I speak to young, I will follow the law, but essentially already, I think the use of a mask is of no value. Anyway, at the time we had no protection against coronavirus, and there were rocketing rates of infection. It was a clear and obvious thing we do, which we had some marginal research to show may have a societal impact if universally adopted. There were those who said they were totally against it. I thought, look, we've got nothing else. This will reduce the rate of droplet spread. We know that. Therefore, it'll have a marginal impact on the R rate, in addition to all the other social distancing measures. So fine, let's adopt masks. But now that really, if all of those who are most vulnerable are protected, and essentially we have reached that point in this country, not in other countries. If in Indonesia they have a vaccination program that's reached 5% of the population, of course they haven't protected their population. It's an ongoing issue for them. So globally, we haven't solved this. We haven't solved problems of global inequality. The poor nations don't have access to health in general, and including protection against COVID, as well as many other things. Of course, we've not solved those problems. But in this country now, having rolled out the vaccination program successfully, it's counterproductive to agitate for measures which do have a corollary of negative consequences, socially and in terms of other medical conditions, as the lockdown skeptics have pointed out previously. Then they were wrong. Now the balance of risk has changed, and essentially they're right. In my opinion, it is high time to open up, and politicians who just want to score points, by in nature being opposition to any measure that the government propose, are going to put themselves wrong sometimes. It's not a question of being supportive of one political ideology or another. It's a question of looking at the data and following common sense, really.
When the facts change, so do my opinions. That would seem axiomatic. Now, moving on, if I may, I read today that the next boss of the NHS, your next boss as a surgeon, as a doctor, may well be the guy that used to run Amazon. That seems apt somehow, given the trajectory of privatization and profit-taking that they have in mind for the health service.
As you say, George, part of over a 40-year period, there's been a prolonged and sustained attack on the concept of a national health service that really is free at the point of use, from the cradle to the grave. Many measures have been introduced which have facilitated the ongoing privatization, and really that carve-up is reaching a high state of almost completion, really, where funding comes from the government, but it will go into the private sector. It will be for us to appeal to the private sector to get healthcare. Healthcare will be rationed. One of those very key steps was to remove the senior clinicians from the point of really managing the service. And we saw that during the pandemic. It's not senior NHS clinicians who are running the response to the pandemic. Government are giving out 10, 20, 30, $40 billion contracts directly to their cronies, sometimes smaller, sometimes just a few $100 million to their actual friends and publicans, but sometimes 30, 40 billion dollar contracts for certain tests, all the rest of it, not being directed by the science in terms of the actual bodies of clinicians organized in the NHS, and that's the same now for the entire direction of the service. So that, what they've done is introduce something they called the revolving door between business and the NHS. Gordon Brown was very into this. Tony Blair was into this. They talked endlessly about the mantra of the market being the only driver of efficiency. So the internal market and removing clinicians from leading the NHS were two of the very key steps that they did from actually stopping us from having controls. So huge amounts of money goes in, but I'm afraid the NHS is fleeced by everyone. They came for the cleaners, and they came for the porters, the cooks, so logistics companies run all of the staffing, and now they're coming for core medical services increasingly, and we've seen the absolute carve up. And the latest white paper that we won't have time, I'm sure, to talk about today, but we've mentioned before, Matt Hancock's white paper is the culmination of that, when actually we're going to see the US private insurance companies having the overriding control of healthcare and social care budgets. And I'm sure that, a scion of the Amazon school is only going to further facilitate that. It's gone beyond an individual appointment now. This is a systemic problem, which really can only be resisted by a sustained campaign from working people themselves, who are the ultimate people who will depend upon this service and find soon, as we're already finding with huge waiting lists, which are not just about the pandemic, they're about undercapacity and privatization, that service won't be there for us when we need it, George.
I expect this from the Conservatives. They wear what they are on their sleeve. What does surprise me is I'm not feeling any opposition to this, either in Parliament from the so-called Labour opposition, or frankly from the health service unions. I lived and was active in the great struggles of the late 1970s, when health service unions, NUPE in particular, NUPE no longer with us, COSE, COHSE no longer with us, NALGO no longer with us, but all these unions, white collar, formerly moderate unions, really made the people feel what was wrong in public services, in particular the health service. Have these unions just given up, or are they agitating about these things? I'm just not hearing it.
George, there are, grassroots campaigners who are deeply worried about the fate of their own hospitals. In Batley and Spen is a perfect example. They've got the downgrading of their local hospital. Bob Gill, a friend of mine who campaigns in his area in South East London, they've got downgrading of their local hospital. So there's downgrading and centralisation. Part of PFI has been to reduce the actual bed capacity. This is continuously happening. And there are groups of citizens, grassroots campaigners all over the country, actually, who are deeply concerned about what's happening. There are nurses campaigning for a reasonable rate of pay rise. If we are unable to sustain nurses on a living wage that allows them to raise families and carry on coming to work, we'll lose nurses, and then we'll eventually have no service. So there are campaigners, but what's not happening is they're not joining up and linking up with any considerable voice. And that's overwhelmingly, as you say, because actually, traditionally, the working people of Britain have always looked to the Labour Party, thinking that the Labour Party will be their saviour, the person who's going to ride in on a white horse and sort all these problems out. When I was very young, and I've been on demonstrations as a child, and people used to chant Maggie, 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 out, 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 because they were sure the next Labour government would come in and sort things out. That Labour government was Tony Blair's government, who proved to be very much more of the same, but with a red rosette instead of a blue rosette. And they introduced PFI and further privatisation. They brought Sir Simon Stevens, who was the agent, really, of the United Health, the American health insurance company, deep into the NHS. And so Labour now in opposition, again, don't really, even under Corbyn, when Corbyn would like to have changed these things, he didn't have any support from his party. He was actively and systematically scuppered, really, in any proposal he had that, varied from the mainstream narrative, including on health. So he didn't really have a separate health policy. And so even when I was involved in the junior doctors' strike at the time, the leaders who were the so-called left-wing leaders came in, and they very much said what we need to do is campaign for a Jeremy Corbyn government and leadership. So there's a constant, everyone looks to Labour Party will come in, they'll be voted into office and they'll sort things out. They have no plans of doing so. And actually it's Labour's connection to these campaigns, many, many health campaigns, that stops them going beyond those limits of what would actually be effective action, which is actually to build an active campaign of local workers and residents and hospital workers in defence of their service. And that never happens. And similarly, I'm afraid to say that even the health workers' unions at a leadership level are intimately tied with the Labour Party. Now, the left wing have always used that as saying this shows that the Labour Party is a party of working people. But actually, the reverse has become the case. It's the influence of the Labour Party stopping unions from fighting, and mobilising actively that stops them from doing the job that they should be doing. And of course, the general public to a large extent, and of course, the profession to a large extent, simply don't have this information as a result. The media are absolutely involved in this kind of conspiracy of silence. They don't ask difficult questions. They don't expose what's going on. And then there's general political complicity from Tory and Labour alike in that process. And therefore, where is the opposition coming from? They're small voices in the wilderness. And until the working people realise that they're being actively betrayed by the party that they've looked to sort themselves out and start to campaign for a different political force that can really enable these individual voices to come together and form a mass campaign, because it would have overwhelming support, of course, to save the NHS from these changes, we won't make significant progress, George.
It's salami, death by a thousand slices. Thank you very much, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, for joining us again on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a call from Malcolm in Edinburgh. Go ahead, Malcolm.
George, thanks for taking my call. A very interesting conversation I had there with the doctor. And I do have a question for you. But on the back of what you were just talking about there, I believe that there was a case last week where the NHS, through preferred suppliers, bought a microwave for £850 that was available around the corner for £50 at Tesco. Wow. Now, on a personal note as well, is like, my GP took me off my medication, which I like, which the NHS has charged £2,000 a month for my medication. I buy it from India, off-label, for £8 a month. Wow. Now, one of the things, Jerry Corbyn did say he was going to set up a system, maybe you correct me on this one, George, I'm not sure, but he was going to actually say, let's take the pharmaceutical money-making machine and do generic drugs for the people at a reasonable cost.
I don't know if he was, but if he was, he should be commended. If he wasn't, he should be criticised, because the cost to the NHS of essential pharmaceutical products is simply enormous. In fact, after the slice that's taken by the interest wallahs on the PFIs, that would be the second biggest expense. And it is absurd that we did not nationalise the pharmaceutical industry at the same time we nationalised the health service. I mean, not to do so was to give the privately owned pharmaceutical big pharma giants a licence to print money, Malcolm.
Well, now, George, I'm going to say something to you, and I have respect for you in this show, which you're doing fantastic with. I'm not going to mention the name because you could get censored for it. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question, okay? And like, with the COVID situation and with, obviously, with what goes on with that, in Peru, they had a, George, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go there because I wouldn't even mention it on your program out of respect for yourself. But I think the pharmaceutical industry is taking the piss.
Yeah, well, no doubt at all about that, and always has. Now, Malcolm, you had a point on national anthems, didn't you?
Well, yes, it's my point to you, George. There's only one country in Europe that doesn't have words to the national anthem. What country is that? So that's my question to you.
That is a very good question. I don't know the answer.
Do you want me to tell you, or you wait for your audience to tell you?
Tell me.
It's actually Spain, and then I watched them standing up to it, and it's like interesting. But it's the only country in.
So what do you do? Do you hum along with it, or what?
Well, no, but you look at them, and they just stand proud, and they stand tall. They don't take a knee, by the way. They stand proud, and they stand tall.
Who needs words? I mean, the words of the British national anthem and the words of the Scottish Pretender are so cringeworthy that I pity those that have to sing them. Malcolm, thanks very much for that call. Now, let's take a look at this live shot coming into us here from a fan zone in Wembley. That looks very, very peaceful, placid. No, that's not England, that's Rome. Wembley doesn't look like that. And they're far too well behaved to be English. Let's get the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The delayed Euro 2020 final between England and Italy is underway. Supporters began arriving at Wembley hours before the eagerly anticipated 8 p.m. kickoff at the stadium, which is hosting 60,000 fans, although only 1,000 closely chaperoned fans from Italy are being allowed to attend the game. Long queues have been forming outside pubs ahead of the match, which sees England aim to win their first major football tournament since 1996. The Queen and Boris Johnson have sent messages of support to the England team. From living rooms to pubs, fan zones and a packed Wembley Stadium, millions are expected to watch the evening's match. Pubs will be allowed to stay open an extra 45 minutes in case of extra time and penalties, while thousands of school children will be allowed to arrive later on Monday so that they can watch the final. Fans also gathered in central London to attend an impromptu gig by the Lightning Seeds, who were reunited with comedians David Baddiel and Frank Skinner to perform the Three Lions football anthem. Fans going to the Euro 2020 final were also urged to get a COVID vaccine if they haven't had a first or second dose. Anyone who dropped into the Wembley Vaccination Centre, which is minutes away from the famous arch, was able to get a jab to help build up their protection against the virus, while some who are attending the game will have had to show proof of vaccination. Many will also have been able to enter after showing proof of a negative lateral flow test or natural immunity after having the virus. People in England should still wear masks in many indoor settings, even after the COVID rules are lifted, the Vaccines Minister has said. The Prime Minister is due to confirm tomorrow whether most of England's lockdown rules, including the legal requirement for masks, will end on the 19th of July. But Nadhim Zahawi said, quote, an expectation for people to be able to wear masks in crowded spaces such as trains would remain. Labour said it was irresponsible to lift the legal requirements for masks. The legal need to wear a face covering in certain places is due to remain for the time being in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The number of people waiting for NHS hospital treatment could reach 13 million in the months to come due to the COVID backlog, the Health Secretary has said. Sajid Javid claims shocking government modelling indicates the current waiting list of 5.3 million people could more than double by the end of the year. This includes up to 7 million people who failed to attend hospital during the peak of the crisis for fear of catching coronavirus, he said. Australia has reported its first locally contracted coronavirus death this year. Authorities said a woman in her 90s died in Sydney. She'd contracted the virus in a family setting. New South Wales reported 77 new cases on Sunday. There are now 52 people in hospital, with 15 in intensive care. Sydney is currently in lockdown as Australia's largest city fights to contain the highly transmissible Delta strain of the virus. The reported death is the state's 57th and the first in 10 months. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian warned that the number of new daily infections would rise further on Monday. I'll be shocked if it's less than 100, she said at a briefing today. She said she feared that tomorrow and the few days afterwards will be worse, much worse than we've seen today, she said. Wildfires are raging in the west of the United States as the region is hit by a heat wave that has brought record temperatures to several areas. Communities have been told to evacuate as firefighters struggle to battle the blazes in extreme conditions. 2 firefighters in Arizona died when their aircraft crashed while responding to a wildfire. Firefighters battling the many wildfires in the region say the air is so dry that most of the water dropped by aircraft to quell the flames evaporates before it reaches the ground. It comes just weeks after another dangerous heatwave hit North America, in which hundreds of sudden deaths were recorded, many of them suspected of being heat-related. The region experienced its hottest June on record, according to the EU's Earth Observation Programme. Experts say that climate change is expected to increase the frequency of extreme weather events such as heat waves. Agents from the United States and other nations are joining the criminal inquiry into the assassination of Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, following days of intrigue. Moïse was killed on Wednesday in his home in a shocking incident for which authorities are still investigating the motives, means and masterminds. At least 28 people are suspected in the plot, of whom 26 are Colombian and 2 are US citizens, according to government figures. But deep distrust of the official narrative reigns in some quarters of the capital city, Port-au-Prince. Influential lawmaker and opposition politician Stephen Benoit said he refused to believe the information provided by the remaining government, currently led by Prime Minister Claude Joseph. Benoit has gained local and international attention for his insistence that the Colombian detainees were merely unlucky scapegoats for an unspecified local perpetrator. And if you're tired of the race or simply want to get away from it all, village in deep south, where it's all year round, paid to come. For those willing to take the plunge, it could soon no longer be just a dream. The region of Calabria plans to offer up to €28,000, that's around £25,000, over a maximum of 3 years to people willing to relocate to the sleepy villages with barely 2,000 inhabitants, in the hope of reversing years of population decline. These include locations near the sea or on mountainsides, or both. This isn't money for nothing, however. In order to get the funds, the new residents must also commit to kick-starting a small business, either from scratch or by taking up pre-existing offers of specific professionals wanted by the towns. There are a few other catches too. Applicants must take up residency within 90 days of their successful application and must be a maximum of 40 years old. And that's the latest here on Sputnik. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the second hour of the mother of all talk shows. England have powered into an early lead in just 2 minutes, and it's the great Luke Shaw that scored the goal. I did tell you it was coming home and not going to Rome, but some of you didn't believe me. Paul Kitching says, let's face it, the Italians love a cracking tune. See Rossini, Verdi, Puccini, even in the fascist period. The anthem Giovanezza is a powerful tune. And Robert Ryan says, Italy, the UK national anthem is as dull as dishwater. And into the bargain, it's about time England got their own for the football. And Mr. MGB says Britain. But one thing I would not do is boo anyone else's at a football game. That's just not sportsmanship. I agree with that. Neil Alexander says, France, La Marseillaise, have you not seen Casablanca? Indeed so. Artform, The Heart, says Italy's is fun and more celebratory. No clue about the lyrics, however. And Marley says the Welsh is the best if sung with the harmonies. However, the French, Italian and Russian are up there, as is the Dutch, which is a beautifully written piece of music. Are you serious? My wife is Dutch. I must consult her, but I'm struggling to associate a beautifully written piece of music with the Dutch. But anyway, the poll is still going. Who's got the best national anthem? Britain, 35%, up 1. Russia, 25%, no change. Italy, 40%, down 1. 1,361 of you have voted. The rest of you can do so now on my Twitter feed. Let's cross the Atlantic and talk with the one and only Rachel Blevins. Rachel, welcome back to the show. It's wonderful, as always, to see you. I must say those flowers are lasting well behind you. They're beautiful,
Yeah.
as always. I've been, of course, broadcasting every night on RT America, and mainly we've been talking about what, on the face of it, is a very major climb down, humiliation, certainly defeat for the United States military in Afghanistan. Your people spent so much of your young men and women's blood, so much of your country's treasure was spent in overthrowing and keeping out of power for 2 decades people who will be back in power 10 minutes after you've gone. And the scuttling out in the middle of the night, literally leaving the lights on and running, is such a national humiliation. It's redolent of the last days of Saigon. Redolent also, I should say, of the Russian withdrawal from, Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's all accompanied by the same rhetoric. We've trained the people that we're leaving behind. They can hold their position when everyone knows neither the South Vietnamese government nor the Najibullah government in Afghanistan that the Soviets left in charge were remotely capable of withstanding the onslaught. And neither is the current regime in Afghanistan. Is there much talk about all this in the US?
Well, quite possibly one of the biggest tragedies in all of this is the fact that the talk is now looking at the Biden administration and saying, congratulations to them. They finally ended the war in Afghanistan after nearly 2 decades. I mean, that is really the media's perspective of it. And it becomes such a disaster because it becomes even more clear that the United States government has not learned from its actions in this country. I mean, you're talking about 20 years of spending tens of billions of dollars every single year to continue a military occupation, to quite literally build new buildings and then blow them up as they go along. And you look back 20 years ago at the Bush administration saying that they were going to launch a war against terrorism. Well, clearly they didn't defeat terrorism in any kind, and clearly they actually made the situation worse. And yes, exactly as you said, you talk about a government that said that they were going to go in there and defeat the Taliban. Yeah, not only has that not happened, but the Taliban is more powerful than ever. They have more land than ever before. And now the United States is kind of backing away, all while knowing that the government that they propped up and installed in this country stands no chance against the Taliban. And at the same time, it's also important to note here that the United States is not ending this war completely, and they're not completely giving up control in the parts of this country that they can still hold on to, because they are leaving at least 650 troops around the U.S. Embassy in the Capitol. And at the same time, there hasn't been much conversation about the nearly 20,000 defense contractors that are remaining in Afghanistan and are essentially helping to prop up the government and the military there. So it is a disaster all around. And quite frankly, we should be looking at trials right now for all of the U.S. officials who have committed war crimes in this country and have walked free over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, including crimes against your own people, sending your own military personnel into a war of choice that has achieved precisely nothing. I've got to tell you, Rachel, I know Afghanistan very well. Neither the 600 troops around the embassy nor the thousands of so-called contractors, mercenaries, are going remotely to be capable of holding off the onslaught whenever the Taliban decide to launch it. And they may be canny about that. I agree with your take that all of this shows extraordinary levels of negligence, stupidity, cupidity. But there is an alternative conspiracy theory. I don't sign up to it myself, but let me put it to you. That the US government knows that the Taliban will be back in power, and it intends to use the Taliban and its Al-Qaeda ally, if that ally comes back in any substantial way. And it is extraordinary how these people manage to move around. I was wondering how all these Chinese terrorists got to Syria, for example. Did they take, budget airlines or what? If Al-Qaeda returns to Afghanistan in a big way, if ISIS emerges in Afghanistan in a big way, what about the possibility that the US will use these elements to cause problems across the border in Tajikistan, but perhaps particularly in Iran, but also in China and also in Pakistan? You could see the possibility of that, couldn't you?
You know, it's interesting that you're talking about this as a possible conspiracy theory, because when we're talking about these theories, it is based on exactly what the United States has done in this region, especially over the last 2 decades. I mean, you just look at the rise of ISIS. We're talking about a time where the Obama administration specifically was saying, oh yeah, we'll get out of Afghanistan, we'll get out of Iraq. And at the same time, all of a sudden they start talking about wanting to overthrow the government in Syria. And then out of nowhere, you have this group that quite literally comes out of nowhere, driving Toyota trucks. You have the US saying, uh-oh, we accidentally dropped supplies in this area where this new group ISIS was able to get to it. I mean, all of these little things that happen, yes, they fuel theories like that make you wonder what is really at the heart of this. Because what we've learned in the last 20 years is that the United States knew going into Afghanistan that they were not going to take this country and create the beacon of democracy. They knew that there was no war to be won here. And so it really makes you wonder, what is the ulterior motive there when you've had Bush, Obama, and Trump all saying we are going to end this war, and then magically Biden walks in the door and now all of a sudden it's really over? Yeah, it makes you wonder what they're going to allow to happen in that country, and also what they're going to do with those troops that they're taking out of the country, because there's always a plan at the end of the day. And, you know, when you have the U.S. in a place already openly saying that it plans to increase tensions with countries like China and like Russia, it really makes you wonder what their plan is when they say that they are going to make these big moves, because at the end of the day, the U.S. looks absolutely ridiculous here, whether they stay in Afghanistan, whether they leave it. I mean, they really don't have themselves in a good place.
No, it certainly wasn't all for women's rights, because the current Afghan government has done virtually nothing for women's rights, and all of women's rights will be taken away when the Taliban returns to power. It certainly wasn't to block the heroin trade, because actually the heroin trade has, if you'll forgive the pun, bloomed and blossomed in Afghanistan, while your country and mine have been in control of it. It certainly wasn't for democracy, because the Afghan government now is the most corrupt government on the earth. The brother of the previous president, was captured at the airport in the UAE, carrying almost $1 billion in cash in Dubai. So if it wasn't about any of these things, you've got to ask, what was it about? Now, either it's a James Bond conspiracy, or it's an Austin Powers series of calamities. I lead to the latter. I don't know about you.
You know, when I look back at all of these U.S. officials that have gone through and that have sold these lies of what they're doing in Afghanistan, it's hard to think about the fact that we have allowed this to happen for so long, whether you compare it to one movie or another. I mean, we look back at former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And it's crazy to think about the fact that when you look back at his whole life, his legacy, all of the lies that he blatantly told, all of the war crimes that he supported, the fact that, you know, people would ask him, hey, wait a second, do you regret any of this? And he said no, because he never had to face any consequences for it. And I think at the end of the day, that's what the U.S. is finally maybe possibly coming up to, is consequences for their actions, blowback for this 2-decade-long war they have launched, for all of the lies that they have told to the American people and to the entire world. I mean, these actions that they have committed, these crimes that they have committed, do not come without consequences. And, you know, we're getting to the point where we're seeing that more and more as we move forward.
Rachel Blevins, as always, a pleasure to see and hear from you on the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for joining us. Now, in 1923, the Hollywood sign was officially opened on the hills above Hollywood in Los Angeles. But what was its original name? A, Hollywoodland, B, Studio City, C, Hollywood Heights. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off, get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. 02077 982 255 is the number if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet me, of course.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, the answer is Hollywoodland. Amazing, yeah? No wonder they cut it short. The original Hollywood sign said Hollywoodland. Definitely, just like losing the in the Facebook was a good idea. Now, art form, the heart says Italy's national anthem is fun, more celebratory. Marley says the Welsh is best sung. Georgie Harrison says the British national anthem is a dirge. Yes, the Archers theme tune would be much better, or maybe something from Brast Off. Both the Russian and Italian national anthems are fantastic and stirring. And monetizing leftism says if you think English music is as good as Italian, go and get yourself a hearing test. Seriously? Where are the Italian Beatles, the Italian Rolling Stones, the Italian Kinks? I mean, are you seriously telling me that Italian popular music is as good as British? That's another poll coming on, I could feel. Who's got the best national anthem? Britain 35, Russia 25, Italy 39. It's hotting up. But I'll tell you what, the Telegram poll is very different. In the Telegram poll, only 13% prefer the British national anthem, 61% prefer the Russian, and 26% prefer the Italian. Let's take some calls. Kenny is in Acton. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Well, I was tickled to hear myself on another call with you on the adverts there, but you thought I was going to speak about the trans issue, and then I started singing.
Exactly, exactly. It was such a magic moment, we've decided to let you back on.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I'd just like to say, I'm Scottish, obviously, and I really want England to win. I'm watching the game now, and I swear, they're playing like a world-class team.
Yeah, they are. It's a very good side. Yeah.
It's like watching Brazil versus Germany. Well, obviously not the World Cup where Germany won 7-1, but it's just like watching two world-class teams. I never really ever seen England as a world-class team. I saw them as a very good team, but this is the first time I've actually watched them play.
Yeah.
And they're actually playing world-class.
Yeah,
They're
well, I'm not watching
Italy.
it.
In Italy, I've won
I'm going to watch it.
games.
I'm going to watch it later, but they've started brilliantly. The game's not over, of course, and Italy are a good counter-attacking side. But I agree with you. Whatever the final result, this is an England team to be proud of, and I'm proud of it. Not just in sporting, for sporting reasons, but also because of its unifying character.
Yes, that's why I want them to win. Now, I think this country is quite divided just now, you know, with the Brexit issue and politics
Brexit and COVID and all kinds of other stresses. But this really brings everyone together.
Of course, I was through central London. I work as a motorcycle courier with Deliveroo. I was working through central London. I see people of all colours, all races with the England flag. It was so great to see. It's the first time since I arrived in London that I've seen the England flag not being depicted as some far right, racist, bigot.
It's only a couple of decades ago that this flag was associated in anyone's mind with fascism, with street extremism. Now every person in the country, black, brown, white, is embracing it. Even my own son, who was born, of course, in England, but sees himself as Scottish and Irish, even he is waving the flag. It's a beautiful thing for me.
Of course, and I think the young black kids need positive role models as well. I'd love to see the win for that, because they're looking up to the wrong role models, and that's what's causing them to get into gang culture and look up to folk that are stabbing and shooting each other.
That's why I love that picture. That's why I love that picture on the front of The Voice of Sancho, of Sterling, of Saka, and of Rashford. I loved it because it showed young black boys, this is what you should aspire to. And in England, you can. In Britain, you can.
Yes. And George, do you know something else?
You're not going to sing again, are you?
No. For the last time you spoke to me, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit. You ain't no friend of mine.
You've actually got a great voice, Kenny and Acton. You can come back. Let's talk to Hugh.
You, George.
Thank you. Let's talk to Hugh in Ireland. Go ahead, Hugh.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway.
Evening, sir.
May I call you George?
Yes, of course.
Do you know what it is? I've been a fan for so long, and it's a strange thing. When you've been watching somebody for years, you feel like you know them even though you've never met. You know?
Yes, that's true. That's true. Well, consider us well and truly met, Hugh.
Oh, thanks very much. That's very nice of you. All week I've been hearing football's coming home, and apparently the rules for the modern day game are English. But to me, the likes of Brazil, I'm not a big football fan, but I think they've won the World Cup 3 or 4 times or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And I can imagine if they hadn't won it in a few years, and then all of a sudden they're doing well, you would say football's coming home because they've won so many tournaments.
Yeah, but I take your point, Hugh. Of course, Brazil are the greatest. But football was invented here. There's a dispute whether Scotland or England, but definitely jointly they developed the game. It came out of a kind of crude rugby. Its rules were delineated here. The Football Association, the English Football Association, was the football association. It was the first football association. I think we've got a good shout to say that, along with some other good things, we invented football as we know it.
But also, George, I've seen a reference, believe it or not, to a version of football in China 2,000 years ago. But don't say football's coming home when the Chinese are playing.
Well, I insist on evidence of that, Hugh. I'll need video of the 2,000-year-old Chinese
Very good
game. Hugh, thanks for that. A lovely call. Let's go to Bobby in London. Go ahead, Bobby.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Thank you for taking my call.
Welcome.
You are a gentleman.
Thank you.
And I am a great supporter of Worker Party of Great Britain. You were fantastic. I was listening to that lady from the United States, Mrs. Blevins.
Yeah, Rachel Blevins, yes. Remember her name. She's going to be really somebody in American public life, believe me.
Yeah, I want to talk about the United States of America.
Yeah.
The United States of America, Mr. Galloway, and their ally, the Western country, they will never want peace in the world. They go from country to another. They destroyed it. then they leave. And the tragedy which made me very sad, none of them since the end of the Second World War has been brought to justice. I honestly believe because they believe we are white people and nobody can take it. The other things I wanted to make a very good program about it is about the because the United Nations doesn't exist. What exists is the Security Council, made with 5 countries, 4 countries white and the other Chinese. And I always, Mr. Galloway, want to add South Africa, India, Brazil or Argentina to be permanent member of the Security Council with veto. This is very, very important. And all the countries I mentioned, you know, apart from China supporting African and things like that, and to the extent Russia, you know, and there is this is their law. The Security Council has to change.
Yes, but Bobby, this is the. Of course, I agree. Not with the actual countries that you mentioned. I see no case for Argentina having a veto on the Security Council, but a democratized United Nations is, of course, necessary. But it is a catch-22 because it could only be achieved if the people who currently have veto power did not veto its democratization, and therefore it is literally pointless to be campaigning on this subject because it will never happen. The United States is never going to allow the Security Council to become democratically accountable. And other countries also may be. Nobody who's currently got permanent veto power is going to allow new permanent veto power countries to come and take their power away. Britain, for example, has little claim to having permanent veto-wielding status in the United States, neither in terms of our population, our military strength, and so on. So we will never allow it. The France will never allow it. So it's kind of pointless, that's all I say. Not that any of the points you made, Bobby, were not powerful in themselves. Thanks for making them. Sorry, Bobby.
Finally, yes. Please don't give up about the by-election. You has won. I said that before. You has won. You need to fight on and return.
You can read my latest column on it, Bobby, on RT.com, and it's there and getting quite a good show, I think. Here are the phone numbers. If you're in the United Kingdom, the number is completely free and is 08081 96 5522. That's 08081 96 5522. It'll cost you nothing at all to call me. If you're in the United States, it is equally free. Toll-free, completely free. It's +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show, of course, anytime at onair@moats.tv, or you can tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK. Let's take a call from Jimmy in London. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh, hi, George. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, sir. Good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I know. I was just calling after I watched your rather strange interview with Owen Jones. He's just a strange guy, isn't he, really? And he said afterwards he'd rather, set his face on fire than vote for you.
Yeah, although he's got a lot of spare faces, so it wouldn't be so expensive a sacrifice, that one. Owen Jones has many faces. I only have one. And therefore, even speaking to Owen Jones is preferable to setting my face on fire.
Indeed. He seems like a very confused young man without much of a personality.
He's not even that young. He just looks it. He's a permanent pixie.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think he'd put on a shirt or something to make himself look a bit older than a T-shirt. But anyway,
I think he's well over 40, Owen Jones. But
I think he's approaching 40. He's like 30, late 30s. Yeah.
Yeah, he acts like he's like a teenager. Yeah, he's a very immature. He's a very immature guy.
Yeah, he just needs to grow a bit of a personality, to be honest. But
and even
I
a beard.
saw that you were. Yeah, but he, bless him. But yeah, I saw you were interacting with Glenn Greenwald, who's a much more interesting character.
He's a fascinating character, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's like probably the best journalist in the world. I think most like widely agreed on that. And people like him. And are you aware of Joe Rogan in America?
Yeah, but I've never actually seen or heard Joe Rogan. But of course, I'm aware of him. Glenn Greenwald is undoubtedly a global journalist par excellence. I worry that he's in Brazil. I worry about the pressures that can be put on him there. But when he's right, my goodness, he's right.
I think he, like you, I think he's right the majority of the time. Both the GGs are spot on.
But we shouldn't be talking about Glenn in the same breath as Owen Jones. I mean, Owen Jones is a poor man's, I don't know what. He's really a creature of. He's a barfly. He's a creature of the demi-monde. He has nothing in common with the great mass of the British people.
Oh, I completely agree. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, instead of, Owen Jones, like, people like Glenn Greenwald have a massive audience. And I think the reason I mentioned Joe Rogan is they're kind of in the same vein as you. Like, they don't do this partisan thing, which I think is of the past. It's very dreary. They focus on more... what's wrong with getting on with the Tories in certain areas? I think that's definitely the future, and that's something you've pioneered, and they're definitely pioneering. And Joe Rogan has an audience you wouldn't believe. I mean, I'm talking tens of millions of viewers each hundreds of millions of viewers a month. It's
well, we must try and hook up with him, either him on our show or me on his, or somewhere in between. I will look at that. I'm a big fan of Jimmy Dore. I see he's in the wars at the moment with the Young Turks. There can only be one outcome of that war, and that's a Jimmy Dore victory.
That's a fascinating conflict as well. He's bringing them down, I have to say, because like they
Jimmy's
keep
a man of the people. Warts and all, he's a man of the people.
And he's in the same vein as you and Greenwald and Rogan, and I think you lot are by far the most interesting people in politics and in the media.
Very kind of you to say so. Jimmy, thank you very much for making that call. Let me go live to Croydon. There's a fan zone there, and England fans are watching the match. All looks very civilised. This is live, right? So England are already 1-up. There's a COVID marshal, yeah. Not many people obeying the social distancing or mask wearing there. How amazing is that? Anyway, how's the poll going? The British national anthem is still ahead. This is a triumph of patriotism over musical sensibility, surely. I mean, Sunny Afternoon by the Kinks, or Waterloo Sunset, or any of the oeuvre of the Beatles or the Stones. Yes, but not the words and music of the British national anthem, surely. But still ahead in our poll, and quite a sizable number of people have voted. 35 for Britain, 26 for Russia, and 39 for Italy. You can give out the what again, Chris? Phone numbers again, our lines are open. 08081 965522 if you're in the UK. 08081 965522 if you're in the UK. It is entirely free, as it is if you're in the United States. And their number is +1 844 944 3344. And of course, don't forget, you can tweet me. I should do some social media if I've got time to do it, because there's so much of it. Lubomir says the Czech Republic has the nicest national anthem. I find that hard to believe, but I'll check it out. And Idris Elias says Pakistan has the best national anthem. And Joanne Nairi says The Russian national anthem moves me, and I'm American. And M. Wing says we need a global anthem, one we can sing to the aliens. Help us, save us, free us from our corrupt officials, or something like that. Now, those would be the words. All we need now is someone to put a tune to that. And Big G. Haywood says, I'm American. We don't watch a bunch of silly fellas kicking a ball around. Oh, don't you, Big G? You actually watch games that you inherited from us, that you Baudelarized, you vulgarized, you infantilized. You turned rugby, a fine game for gentlemen, into American football. You turned billiards, snooker, into pool. You turned cricket into baseball. And you're telling me you don't watch guys running around chasing a ball? Go tell it to the Marines. Here is the latest. Did I give the answer to Hollywoodland? I did. All right. In 1943, the greatest tank battle in history resulted in Russia's defeat of Nazi Germany at Kursk. How many tanks did Germany lose? A, 750, B, 1,900, or C, 2,900? Wow. Answers after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, everybody knows the importance of the Battle of Stalingrad, which turned the tide in the Second World War against Nazi Germany, but not so many as should remember the Battle of Kursk, the greatest tank battle in military history. The Nazis lost a staggering 2,900 tanks at the Battle of Kursk, and the Red Army victory there opened the gates to Berlin, and it was victory after victory after victory for the Red Army after that. Now, everybody knows what the United States colonizers did to the Native American people. Everybody knows or should know what the English colonizers did in Australia and to a slightly lesser extent, but still in New Zealand, to a total extent in Tasmania, where every last Tasmanian was wiped out by the colonists. But for a long time, Canada, the nicer, gentler, kinder North American state, got a slight buy on this. They were held to be nicer, kinder, gentler people. They were assumed, therefore, to have treated the Native American residents of Canada before the colonization. They were imagined to have treated them better, at least, than the neighbors to the south of them. This has been chipped away over recent years, but it is now accelerating into a gigantic scandal following the discovery of literally thousands of unmarked graves containing the remains of Native American children that had been taken from their families and put in state institutions, usually run by the church. I'm sorry to say, in most cases by the Catholic Church, but other churches too. And when they died, they were of such little consequence that they were tossed, literally tossed into unmarked graves, unconsecrated ground, and uncounted, and certainly not accounted for to their parents from whom they had been forcibly taken. The number of dead children in these church institutions is growing almost by the day, and they've only just begun looking with the proper X-ray equipment. The man that has been in the lead on uncovering this story is my colleague, the very, very able Alex Mihailovich of RT America, who joins us now. Alex, this is a melancholy story to be in the lead on, but at least most people in Britain, at least, only know about this because of you, because of the reports that you have done for RT America on it. But for those remaining people who don't yet know, summarize the scale and importance of this scandal, will you please?
Well, George, I think it's just as important for Canadians. I mean, this is not something that we learned in school. So for many of us, this is the first time hearing of this, especially the new Canadians who've come here in the past decade or so. This is a situation that has really tugged at the hearts of most Canadians and really the minds as well. This is, Canada the good, as you were saying, and now we don't look as good as we used to. Now, this history is something that has really stained what we believed as Canadians Canada is. I mean, there have been stories about this in the past, but I think it's really hitting home this time around. So we're looking at the possibility of up to 6,000 unmarked graves. 150,000 Native children were put through these schools called residential schools that were primarily run by the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, and the Anglican. But when I say primarily, I am sticking to the Catholic Church. Over 50% of them were run by that church. 130 schools from coast to coast in Canada. So you're looking at many of these sites that have not even yet been investigated, possibly having more bodies there. So what we've seen up to now is over 1,000, and the number just seems to be increasing all the time. Now, personally, I've heard of this back in 2004 for the first time when I was a rookie reporter up in a town called Sault Ste. Marie, which is about 700 kilometers outside of Toronto, moving north of here, northwest. There's a school called Algoma University there, and one of their main buildings was a residential school. Now, I had many native friends that I made during my time up there, primarily of the Ojibwe First Nation called Garden River, which is pretty much kitty cornered right up to this school. And they say in the back of the school, the stories were there are unmarked graves, there are many children back there, and you can stand on the soil and you knew that something was wrong at that site. Well, it seems that they're going to start also looking in and investigating in that area as well to see what was going on. But it was absolutely horrific what these children had to endure. There was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was mental abuse. And many of these people are alive to this day. You have to remember, these schools operated from 1863 to 1996. So this is relatively new. That's when the last school closed. So this is not some distant Canadian history. This is during most of our lifetimes that this actually went down. And for the fact of the matter was, most of us were not aware that this was happening.
Now, these children were effectively taken to be deracinated, for their culture to be stripped from them, even their language stripped from them. They were not allowed to speak their native language, nor dress or dance in their original way. This is a cultural genocide we're talking about here.
Oh, absolutely. And in 2015, that's exactly what the country, the federal government here in Canada declared, a cultural genocide. So we know that that happened, and Christianity was forced upon these children. They were not allowed to speak their native tongues. So yes, this was, some people described it, killing the Indian inside these children. They were ripped out of their parents' arms to the point where some of these, the parents themselves would sit outside of these residential schools hoping just to get a glimpse of their own children. It was absolutely dramatic. It was frightful what was happening to these kids. And we're still, like, to this day, we have to look at the Canadian system here. There are thousands of Native kids that are not living with their families, that are enduring right now what some are calling massive human rights abuses. So if we're talking anything along the line of reparations, this is where we have to start. We have to start with these children, ensuring that they don't go through what their forefathers went through. We have to make sure that treaties that we've had with First Nations in this country that have been basically shunned and pushed aside, they need to be respected. If we as Canadians can look at ourselves in the mirror, this has to happen. We have to be able to live with the fact that our forefathers did something that is absolutely despicable, and now's the time to make things right. And I think these are two very important steps in the right direction, and especially taking care of these Native children, and maybe giving them clean drinking water would be a nice thing too. We have many First Nations in this country that don't have the simple right of clean drinking water. So there is a push here. A push is happening, but at the same time, simultaneously, the Canadian government is suing some of these people that are trying to push through the court system or I should say fighting these people that are trying to push through the court system to get the reparations and to make what went wrong right as much as possible.
I mean, what was it all about, Alex? Presumably, I mean, one of the most haunting phrases I heard in one of your reports, one of our discussions on RT America about this, was that these children were held to have no soul and therefore could be disposed of as effectively subhumans when they died. How did they die? What was the cause of all these deaths?
Well, George, they were seen as savages. And basically, there's a famous line, I'm going to ad-lib a bit here. It basically says that the only thing that by taking these kids and educating them on First Nations, close to their homes, close to their parents, all you're doing is creating savages that can read. So, I mean, that's really the extent of this. It's absolutely horrific that this type of language even existed. What happened to these kids? As I mentioned, sexual abuse, physical abuse. They were even some of the First Nations, there were even tests on these children to gauge how hunger affects children and how starvation affects children. So they weren't seen as people. Bottom line, the Canadian government and the masters of the time did not see these people as people. And that, I think, is the biggest shock for all of us here, that actually existed in this country. I remember my father telling me, he came here in 1950, so he learned from a lot of the people that were much older than him at the time and that went through that and witnessed what it was like for the First Nations people. And he told me a story of one man who was saying that they used to hunt Indians to get $5 a head, $5 a head at the post office. And when I say a head, I mean a head of a person. So this is, this could have been some type of myth at the time. I'm not sure. I have not found anything to collaborate that. But at the same time, this is the type of basically attitude and behavior.
It's a kind of fascism. It's a kind of fascism, Alex, isn't it?
Absolutely. And to this day, you're going to see this type of discrimination. And maybe, well, let's tone it down a bit, and maybe not this type of discrimination, but definitely discrimination against Native people and Native communities throughout this country, primarily if you look in the prairie provinces.
It's a shock to non-Canadians. You make the point, it's a shock to Canadians too. But Canada does have a nice, kind reputation in the world, at least by contrast to its southern neighbour. Was that all a myth too?
Well, I mean, it's kind of difficult when you look at that contrast. I mean, it really is apples to oranges. Canada is a very different country than the United States of America. And yes, our laws and our ways of life are quite different. Even though we're right next door to them, we do speak the same language. There are similarities, maybe cultural similarities when it comes to pop culture and such. But we do live differently here, as you know, with our healthcare system. And I think we'd like to think of ourselves as kinder than the sort of American approach of the Wild West and, you know, guns ablaze and moving forward. Canadians do see themselves differently, but at the same time, and exactly what you mentioned now, when we look at the global community, well, we can't keep pushing our hypocrisy, can we? So when we're looking at the Uyghurs of China, when our prime minister says something against China about something that is unproven, well, China, it's pretty easy for China to say back or to rebuke with something that is proven. We know that this happened to the Native people in Canada. The claims that we're making against other nations don't necessarily have the same type of backing.
What happens next, finally, Alex? I saw the Prime Minister of Canada, very sincere, at least on the face of it. Are they going to make reparation? How can they make reparation for all of this?
Basically, I think Canadians have had enough of apologies and they want to see things get done. I think it's starting with the Catholic Church. Let's say one more apology. Let's add one more apology, which would be nice, from the Catholic Church, from the Pope. We haven't heard that yet to the people, to the First Nations people of this country. Second of all, the Catholic Church promised back about 15 years ago that they were going to give $25 million in reparations to First Nations people that were affected by residential schools. That never happened. Maybe 4 million of that happened. 21 million still has not gone through. Meanwhile, they've invested about 300 million in building new churches in this country. So you see that there's something unfair there. When it comes to the Canadian government, it's simply, let's respect the treaties that were signed with these people. Let's bring those back. Let's respect these treaties, and let's make sure that the Indigenous people that live in this nation today and the children are taken care of properly. That does not necessarily mean throwing money at First Nations, because as we know, First Nations also have their political problems. Sometimes that money, if it goes to a First Nation, it doesn't get to the people that actually need the money. So that has to be taken care of in a respectful way, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of accountability and there has to be some sort of accounting for where this money goes and that it's actually reaching the right people that need it the most.
I said finally, but one question arises from that, if I may. Where are the First Nation people, the native people? I've been to Canada many times. I've done speaking tours across the country. I'm not sure I ever saw or met a Native American there, not knowingly anyway. Are they literally on reservations or what?
Oh, one of my best friends in the world is Ojibwe, and he happens to be a cameraman for one of the biggest networks here in Toronto. His wife, who's also Native, half Métis, she's a nurse in a Toronto hospital. These people are very accomplished. They've pushed their way through, even with the barriers that were set up against them. So you do have quite a large Native population in the cities such as Toronto, more so if you're looking in cities such as Winnipeg and in central Canada. Then you have the reservations. So you leave Toronto, you drive about 80 kilometers out of there, or even closer. There are reservations set up all around Ontario and all throughout the country. The key here is respecting it as Native land. So as a journalist, whenever I've gone to the Band Council. I talk to them first to get permission that I can film and interview people on their territory, on their land. And it's sprinkled throughout the whole nation. And there's a lot of territory, especially in the province of Quebec. They say it's a massive chunk. Some people say 1 to 2/3 of the province are actually native land. So that's the thing. I mean, we have to work with these people. We have to work with the people, the First Nations. I think that's particularly important to hear. They were here first. So let's do our part now. We know that things aren't going to change. We're not going anywhere. So let's work together and let's make sure that they get what they deserve, and let's make sure that they get a piece of this pie and that they get the respect they deserve from the treaties that we've signed in the past and from any agreements that we're going to sign now or in the future. We have to respect that, and we have to put these people, I believe, on a pedestal.
Well said and well done, Alex Mihailovich. Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, before the news, let's go back to that fan zone, shall we, in Croydon? It's half-time now, and England are still 1-0 up. Who'd have thunk it? Well, me. And it had to be a Manchester United player that actually did the deed. Nick says England's national anthem should be Jerusalem. I have, for a long time, been advocating that. Let's build a new Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Let's go to the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The delayed Euro 2020 final between England and Italy is underway. Supporters began arriving at Wembley hours before the eagerly anticipated 8 p.m. kickoff at the stadium, which is hosting 60,000 fans, although only 1,000 closely chaperoned fans from Italy are being allowed to attend the game. Long queues have been forming outside pubs ahead of the match, which sees England aim to win their first major football tournament since 1996. The Queen and Boris Johnson have sent messages of support to the England team. From living rooms to pubs, fan zones and a packed Wembley Stadium, millions are expected to watch the evening's match. Pubs will be allowed to stay open an extra 45 minutes in case of extra time and penalties, while thousands of school children will be allowed to arrive later on Monday so that they can watch the final. Fans also gathered in central London to attend an impromptu gig by the Lightning Seeds, who were reunited with comedians David Baddiel and Frank Skinner to perform the Three Lions football anthem. Fans going to the Euro 2020 final were also urged to get a COVID vaccine if they haven't had a first or second dose. Anyone who dropped into the Wembley Vaccination Centre, which is minutes away from the famous arch, was able to get a jab to help build up their protection against the virus, while some who are attending the game will have had to show proof of vaccination. Many will also have been able to enter after showing proof of a negative lateral flow test or natural immunity after having the virus. People in England should still wear masks in many indoor settings, even after the COVID rules are lifted, the Vaccines Minister has said. The Prime Minister is due to confirm tomorrow whether most of England's lockdown rules, including the legal requirement for masks, will end on the 19th of July. But Nadhim Zahawi said, quote, an expectation for people to be able to wear masks in crowded spaces such as trains would remain. Labour said it was irresponsible to lift the legal requirements for masks. The legal need to wear a face covering in certain places is due to remain for the time being in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The number of people waiting for NHS hospital treatment could reach 13 million in the months to come due to the COVID backlog, the Health Secretary has said. Sajid Javid claims shocking government modelling indicates the current waiting list of 5.3 million people could more than double by the end of the year. This includes up to 7 million people who failed to attend hospital during the peak of the crisis for fear of catching coronavirus, he said. Australia has reported its first locally contracted coronavirus death this year. Authorities said a woman in her 90s died in Sydney. She'd contracted the virus in a family setting. New South Wales reported 77 new cases on Sunday. There are now 52 people in hospital, with 15 in intensive care. Sydney is currently in lockdown as Australia's largest city fights to contain the highly transmissible Delta strain of the virus. The reported death is the state's 57th and the first in 10 months. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian warned that the number of new daily infections would rise further on Monday. "I'll be shocked if it's less than 100, she said at a briefing today. She said she feared that tomorrow and the few days afterwards will be worse, much worse than we've seen today, she said. Wildfires are raging in the west of the United States as the region is hit by a heat wave that has brought record temperatures to several areas. Communities have been told to evacuate as firefighters struggle to battle the blazes in extreme conditions. 2 firefighters in Arizona died when their aircraft crashed while responding to a wildfire. Firefighters battling the many wildfires in the region say the air is so dry that most of the water dropped by aircraft to quell the flames evaporates before it reaches the ground. It comes just weeks after another dangerous heatwave hit North America, in which hundreds of sudden deaths were recorded, many of them suspected of being heat-related. The region experienced its hottest June on record, according to the EU's Earth Observation Programme. Experts say that climate change is expected to increase the frequency of extreme weather events such as heat waves. Agents from the United States and other nations are joining the criminal inquiry into the assassination of Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, following days of intrigue. Moïse was killed on Wednesday in his home in a shocking incident for which authorities are still investigating the motives, means and masterminds. At least 28 people are suspected in the plot, of whom 26 are Colombian and 2 are US citizens, according to government figures. But deep distrust of the official narrative reigns in some quarters of the capital city, Port-au-Prince. Influential lawmaker and opposition politician Stephen Benoit said he refused to believe the information provided by the Romanian government, currently led by Prime Minister Claude Joseph. Benoit has gained local and international attention for his insistence that the Colombian detainees were merely unlucky scapegoats for an unspecified local perpetrator. If you're tired of race or simply want to get away from it, an idyllic village in Italy's deep south where it's almost all year round and you can be paid to come. For those willing to take the plunge, it could soon no longer be just a dream. The region of Calabria plans to offer up to €28,000, that's around £25,000, over a maximum of 3 years to people willing to relocate to the sleepy villages with barely 2,000 inhabitants in the hope of reversing years of population decline. These include locations near the sea or on mountainsides, or both. This isn't money for nothing, however. In order to get the funds, the new residents must also commit to kick-starting a small business, either from scratch or by taking up pre-existing offers of specific professionals wanted by the towns. There are a few other catches too. Applicants must take up residency within 90 days of their successful application and must be a maximum of 40 years old. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, the great Chris Hedges is up next. We're just having a little difficulty contacting him. I want to discuss with him the events in Haiti over the last few days, as well as, of course, the humiliating rout, actually, of the American forces in Afghanistan and what it means for the country and for the world. There'll be another poll up in a minute also. Let me deal with some more of the social media. Turkey Day says soccer is a great unifier, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, etc. God save the green, he says. And Nigel, a Bolton lad, says, I think if our national anthem was Jerusalem, then it would win hands down. And Giacomo Fisher says, why doesn't England have a unified team on the island? I'm asking as a foreigner. I'd be up for that, but I don't think many in Scotland or Wales would. Giacomo also asks, I'm fascinated as an American as to why you all don't combine for one grand team. I don't understand that. I'd listen to what you all have to say. Well, let's take some calls and feedback on that. He also asks, how does George roll that R like that? Around the rock, the rugged rascal ran. It's in the genes. Here's the poll. Did the Taliban win in Afghanistan? A, yes. B, no. Let's hear from you on that. And Big G Haywood is back. The socialists, when they were in power in Afghanistan, they promoted women's rights and educated women. That has the uncomfortable aspect of being entirely true. MWNG says, we need a global anthem. Oh, we've done that one. He wants to sing to the aliens. Help us, save us, free us from our corrupt officials. It just needs music, that. Why are you for Irish independence, George, and not a Scottish one, asks Sivedan. Well, first of all, Ireland was taken by force, and a part of it is held onto by force. Scotland was never taken by force, and none of it is held onto by force. Secondly, the Scottish people just 7 years ago, not even 7 years ago, had a plebiscite on this matter, and this is your real problem. Your real problem is not with me. It's with the fact that by a decisive majority, in a once-in-a-generation, sometimes described as once-in-a-lifetime, plebiscite, referendum, in which more Scots voted than have ever voted for anything or anyone ever in their history, decisively decided to remain in the United Kingdom. Now, I believe in respecting the results of referendums. Don't you? Where would we be if everyone was like the SNP, rejecting the result of every referendum that they don't like the result of? That's the road to perdition. Still trying to get Chris Hedges. Sean Beber says, the Nationalists won't share that sentiment of yours, which is sad, as most English football fans would support Scotland in a final. And Wayne says, I agree with you, so I asked the question, why do you plug your life and allegiance? Plug. Why do I plug my life and allegiance to the Queen and her hair? Her hair, H-A-I-R, when you walk into Parliament. It's a very good point, despite the misspelling. I don't plug, I pledge, and not to her hair, but to all of her heirs and successors, because if I didn't, I literally would not be allowed to sit down in the Parliament. I wouldn't get my wages, which is a matter of some importance to my family, but more importantly, I would not be allowed to sit down in the Parliament. I'd not be allowed into the chamber, even to listen to other people, if I did not so pledge. Now, that's wrong. I do it when I'm sworn in, as I have been 6 times. I do it by affirmation, not on any holy book, because I could not swear on a holy book that pledge which is insincere in my case. I don't support the system of monarchy. I respect the Queen, and I know that the vast majority of my fellow citizens love her dearly. There is no prospect of Britain becoming a republic, but if it was left to me, it would be a republic. I'd run for president of it. And it's wrong, it's democratically wrong, that I have to pretend to be a monarchist before I can sit down in a parliament to which I have been elected by the people. Now, Sinn Féin, they refuse to make that plug or pledge, and therefore cannot sit in Parliament. And that's a matter for them. You could argue that it's certainly a purer and more sincere stance than the rest of us are forced to make. Some crossed their fingers while they were swearing this oath and so on, but to me, I'm not big on oaths in any case. It's an unworthy oath to make members of Parliament plug or pledge. We've got Chris now. Chris Hedges, to call him a journalist, to call him a writer, to call him an activist, is a severe understatement. This is a man who graced for many, many years the pages of the New York Times until their disgrace forced him out. In any sane USA, he'd be in the government, he'd be the Secretary of State, maybe even higher than that. Luckily, he's a sage that we've gotten hold of on this evening on the mother of all talk shows. Chris, welcome back on the Moats. Sorry we struggled to reach you earlier. I wanted to ask you what's going on in Haiti and whether the United States is complicit in the murder of the Haitian president and the wounding of his lady wife. If you're able to help us understand what's happened, we'd be grateful.
Well, they have created the chaos in Haiti, as they have, in a similar way, created the same kind of chaos in countries like Honduras. The United States has basically two major policy goals in Haiti. One, whatever government is in power will never be allowed to build an alliance with Cuba and Venezuela. And secondly, whatever government is in power will never be able to thwart the pillaging by U.S. business interests in Haiti. Those are the prerequisites. And anything else that government does, including creating the kind of failed state that Haiti has become, is considered collateral damage from U.S. interests. So yes, the United States, we don't really know who went in yet to Mosse's house and killed him, but the unraveling of Haiti as a functioning system has been by design. And you see Honduras would be a good example. Again, lawless gang violence, wanton pillaging by an elite that is blessed and beholden to the United States. And of course, that's why they have asked for the acting interim president, whoever he is, the interim prime minister, has asked for U.S. intervention.
I mean, this was not a lone gunman. This was not a lone wolf. This was a highly organized and large commando of people, virtually none of whom were Haitian, and therefore who came into the country from somewhere and then sought refuge in, of all the embassies, in the Taiwan embassy, a puppet government, a puppet regime of the United States. Suspicious, no?
Yeah, I mean, mercenaries for hire, especially out of countries like Colombia, are not uncommon, and these are 17 ex-members, apparently, of Colombia's military, but they were probably hired at the behest of whatever warring faction wanted the president removed and wanted to take power. But these are kind of internecine, almost tribal battles, which the United States doesn't really have any problem with, as long as whoever is in power caters to those two iron rules that can't be broken. no alliances with popular governments, particular Cuba and Venezuela, and no interference with the wanton pillage by global corporations. Haiti's deterioration is something that has been long in the making. The United States has, going all the way back to the occupation in the 1930s, essentially governed Haiti as a protectorate, and in a few cases like Aristide, where you actually saw some kind of resistance, those governments were gotten rid of.
I did read that the Clintons had been heavily involved in Haiti. Are they still?
I don't know whether the Clintons are still involved, but the ruling party, which got its start in 2012, was essentially put in place by, at the time, the State Department under Hillary Clinton, and the United Nations Special Envoy and co-chair of the Interim Haitian Reconstruction Commission, which happened to be Bill Clinton. You have what they call the core group: France, Canada, Brazil, and the European Union and the OAS, the Organization of American States, that essentially dictates who has power and who doesn't. So, yes, there is a strong Clinton involvement in terms of the modern configurations of power within Haiti.
Now let's switch continents, if we may. The week has been marked by what I described earlier as scenes reminiscent of the last days of Saigon, with the satrapies of the foreign occupation power in Afghanistan scrambling onto aircraft, running over international borders to escape, soldiers deserting, and sweeping gains, territorial gains, by the insurgent forces, in this case, the Taliban. On the face of it, that's quite a humiliating end to 20 years of American-led war in the country. Yet, talking to Rachel Blevins earlier, it doesn't seem to have been treated like that in the U.S. media. Why?
Because the war has long, like the conflicts in Iraq or anywhere else, it's just not covered. It's not, almost rarely makes an appearance on the news media. Those soldiers and Marines that are there are they're not conscripted. They're it's the volunteer army and the mercenaries, so it's essentially confined to a very small demographic of the American public, which is an economic distress. So I think we checked out, certainly the U.S. media checked out of covering Afghanistan a long time ago. And there is a kind of exhaustion with, 20 years of conflict. But yes, you're right. It has almost, we've lost the war. That's what's happened. It's the Taliban controls 85%, but even at the height of American presence, the Taliban controlled about 70% of Afghanistan. And unlike Iraq, most of the Afghan population lives in rural areas, not in urban centers. So the only reason I think the war was perpetuated is because it was quite profitable to certain arms contractors and defense industry concerns. But I think the last few years has been a deep cynicism within the military itself. But yes, it's kind of ended with a whimper, not a bang. Yeah, it is kind of remarkable as to how unnoticed the withdrawal is.
Unless, of course, there's a plan B. And I put this earlier to Rachel. It's a conspiracy theory, but it's not an outlandish one. What if the U.S. now intends to use the very same Islamist fanatics that it's supposed to be fighting around the world against Afghanistan's neighbors? China, Iran, high on the list of American targets, now have an uncomfortable neighbor again.
Well, we know that there was an arming and empowering of radical jihadists in Syria because it was believed that these jihadists would serve the interests of U.S. hegemony in the region by attacking the Assad regime in Damascus. So yes, there's long been these collusions. I mean, remember going all the way back to the war with the Soviets, who was it that created the radical jihadists? It was the ISI in Pakistan, which funneled billions of, I think it was $9 billion, I don't know the final figure, billions of US dollars, but to support not, the most extreme elements, because for Pakistan, the whole issue was always about India. They never wanted a country, Afghanistan, to be ruled by any faction that might make an alliance with India. So that's why the jihadists were groomed and picked, including Osama bin Laden. So, no, that's not far-fetched at all. There's a constant, almost shifting of sides, and I think Syria is a good example. So many of the operatives who were in Iraq attacking American soldiers simply migrated to Syria, where they were given $500 million in weapons and really reconstituted themselves in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, some of them even turned up in Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, I don't know if they've got their own budget airline, but these jihadists somehow miraculously make their way from theater to theater where it suits the colonial powers for them to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we have to remember that there is a deep animus between these radical jihadists and Iran. So they become a very effective tool against Iranian interests. I think one of the kind of footnotes to the war in Iraq that people aren't always aware of is that it was Iranian intervention that was crucial in terms of pushing back the tide of these radical Sunni groups. That's the shifting sands of alliances in the Middle East is long and nefarious. So no, I wouldn't find that far-fetched at all.
But nobody, just like here in Britain, nobody pays any price for piloting and proselytizing for these disastrous wars. In the case of Afghanistan, you've spent $1 trillion and given the blood of thousands of your young men and the limbs of thousands more and the brains of thousands more, but nobody's held to account for it. Neither are the journalists who prattled on about women's rights and we're doing this for democracy and so on. None of them are held to account, Chris.
Well, no, they're promoted because they do what they're supposed to do, which is serve the interests of power. So all of the journalists, and of course I confronted them, and I had been the Middle East bureau chief of the New York Times on the, when there were all the calls to invade Iraq. All of these journalists and pundits didn't pay a price because they did what was good for their career and they served the centers of power, which is why they remain where they are. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. The whole tenor of debate in the United States is ludicrous. It reminds me of what Dorothy Parker once said of Katharine Hepburn's emotional range as an actress. It goes from A to B. So it's, do we bomb them or do we bomb them and put boots on the ground? And those are kind of the endless discussions. And that's just part of the constriction of public debate and of the media itself. The people who are commentators on these wars in Iraq are drawn, even on the quote-unquote liberal cable channels like MSNBC. They are the former CIA directors, retired generals, and many of whom, almost all of them, sit on the boards of defense contractors who are making a killing off of these wars. So, yeah, that's just part of the whole corruption of the media. There's no price to pay. I mean, all of the architects of the war have never paid a price and, in fact, have been rewarded and feted for what I would argue is probably the greatest strategic miscalculation in American history.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be no solace to you, but exactly the same has happened here. None of the politicians who followed George Bush into these disasters, and none of the commentators are now without a job, and most of them are in promoted posts. So it's another thing like common language that we have in common together. Chris Hedges, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, Italy have equalised against England in the 65th minute. My prediction was a 2-1 English victory after extra time. I'm sticking with that, and so far I am ahead, because if it stays 1-1, there will be extra time. Now, some more of George's general knowledge in this week. In 1940, Hitler ordered preparations for the invasion of Britain. What was the operation's code name? A, Operation Seahorse, B, Operation Sea Lion, C, Operation Sea Change. It's just for fun, but we'll give you the answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tom says after independence we could choose the government we want. Tom, could you not have called me and argued that nonsense? Couldn't you? What's wrong with you, man? You've had the vaccine. Go ahead.
When I came out, I went into a boxer's stance and started doing a jig. And an old fellow said, "Hey, have you just had that vaccine?" I said, "Aye." And he said to his wife, "Come on, love, you better get me one of them." He said, "And make me dance."
So you're full of life. And Ben says, could Scotland actually do better autonomously? Like I want California to secede, but I think we'd thrive if not burdened by the rest of the US. How very revealing of you, Ben. How utterly revealing of you. And Philip says, how any Labour or Tory supporter has the nerve to say the SNP are corrupt is beyond me. Why do you people not have the guts to call up instead of cowering behind one single name on social media?
There's a lot of people in Bradford who won't be taking this antivirus due to religious grounds.
Simon, what do you mean by religious grounds?
Religious grounds, I mean, many Muslims, for example, have issues with regards to this vaccine. Certain things.
Tell me what issues? What issues?
Well, for example, pork.
What does pork have to do with this vaccine?
You're kind of, again, you're clouding the issue here. There's the religious.
I'm not clouding the issue. You said pork.
Of course
you said pork.
But
Simon,
other things which
are you yourself a Muslim?
It doesn't matter whether I am or not.
It does, because you are purporting. No, it does.
It's justified for people to ask that.
Be quiet for a moment, please.
No, I won't. It's justified.
Well, you will, because I'll turn your volume down. This is dangerous, reckless, ignorant, and potentially fatal nonsense. Get out of my sight and don't come back.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Did I really just say that to that caller? How many callers have I banned? It's a wonder we've got any left. Did the Taliban win in Afghanistan? A, yes, 85%. B, no, 15%. You can have your say right up until the end of the show. Hitler's plan was, of course, Operation Sea Lion, but it never actually happened. Let's take calls all the way to the end of the show. If you're in the United Kingdom, it's 0808196 5522. If you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. Let me hear from you, as Eddie in Rochford has done. Go ahead, Eddie.
Hello, George.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Talking about the anthems.
Yeah.
The Marseillaise definitely should be #1 in the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that wasn't on the poll. It's so stirring. It's remarkable. And the words, too.
But as far as your poll goes, it should be Russia, Britain without the words, and Italy. Because I've never heard Italy, so I'm not sure what it's about.
No, although it seems to have had a lot of support on the poll. I think it won the poll, but that may be skewed by Scottish votes. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think the British national anthem is a dirge, and the only one I can think of that's worse than it is Flower of Scotland, which is even more dirge-like. Where do you stand on this, Adi?
Without the words, I think it's in the top 10 of national anthems, with the Germans and the French and the, but add the words, then you're right what you're saying, it's a dirge.
Okay, what about Jerusalem as an alternative? Or even Land of Hope and Glory with different words?
Oh, definitely number one. Well, that'd be number one in the world, I should imagine.
I'm with you on that, Adi. Thanks for the call. Kashmiri is in the United States. Go ahead, Kashmiri.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for taking my call.
It's a great pleasure, I assure you.
So, just wanted to say that we're hearing a lot about the human rights violations in Xinjiang. And it's true, the spotlight on them is appropriate and the condemnation, etc. But there have been decades of human rights violation in Kashmir, and we don't hear a peep, and, Xinjiang we had a border, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir before partition. We actually had a border with Xinjiang as well. Just to give a little bit of a geographic perspective, you just have to move your eyes a little laterally and you'll hit Kashmir, and your eyes will hit Kashmir. Why is there so much silence around Kashmir?
Well, if there was oil in the valley instead of just blood and tears, there would be a lot of attention to it. If India were still aligned to the former Soviet Union, where it's still around, then there would be a lot of Western sympathy for Kashmiris. But as the West and India's interests have steadily come together, then of course you have a blanket of silence over not just decades, if I may say. You have more than half a century of extreme repression in Kashmir. The Indian government in the 1950s promised a plebiscite on the future of Kashmir because, as you say, it had been a princely state. Its prince was a Hindu. He chose to go to India, though the population was overwhelmingly Muslim and did not want to go to India. And by now, some want an independent Kashmir, some want to go to Pakistan. But the one thing that hardly anybody in Kashmir wants is a continuation of Indian rule. So that is, in short, Kashmiri, the answer. Maybe one day we'll have a longer discussion on it. Thank you very much for the call. Miles is in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Miles.
Hey, George.
Hi.
We were protesting in Piccadilly Circus for Julian Assange's freedom on Saturday, which we do every week at 4 o'clock, Piccadilly Circus. But we're hearing a lot of conversations about mainstream media not picking up on the key witness to his case on the American side, who confessed to lying in his witness statement for the Americans. And there's even rumors that the American FBI flew out there 48 hours after learning of this person and coached him, witness tampering. And we're trying to get the press to cover the story, but we're struggling. And we don't know if there's D notices in place in the UK, or it's just a journalistic boys club who are basically stonewalling the whole conversation.
I think there's no need of D notice. Thank God you cannot bribe or twist the average British journalist for seeing what they'll do unbribed, you realize there's no reason to. The D-notice system is very rarely used. Much more often, the state can rely on the cowardice and avarice of the journalists and their proprietors. And the truth is, they all know the story that the key witness has admitted to having lied, and having lied directly on the orders of the American prosecutors in exchange for no prosecution of himself. And why that is not big news shows precisely why Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were so essential to the world, because of the corrupted nature of the rest of the media. The Guardian has literally not published a single word about this dramatic breaking news on the Julian Assange story. I don't know how the editor, Kath Viner, formerly a friend of mine, can sleep at night. Thanks, Miles, for the call. Ian is in Hounslow in London, but on Canada. Go ahead, Ian. Ian, are you there? No, he's lost. Right. Maratime says, Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. And Michael Kluwer says, a Russian general interviewed on TV around 35 years ago said, take the first road out now. You will not win in Afghanistan. And Oliver Law says, George believes a book that endorses racial hierarchy, slavery and genocide is a holy book. Well, I don't know about that, Oliver, but there are quite a few of us who think the book is holy. NSPK77 says the US never forgave Haiti for being the first country that liberated itself from slavery. And Yoda says, love the show, best entertainment and education on the airwaves. And Holly Stewart says, a great journalist right there. Chris Hedges is excellent. The USA is funding so much wickedness in the world. And Debbie says, I don't think anyone won in Afghanistan. Sammy says, the home team, Taliban and Afghanistan, beating the away team, USA and friends. Now it's time for Afghanistan to build infrastructure and improve living standards. Yeah, right. And MWNG says, the drugs are winning the drug war too. And Jack Klugman says, perpetual war is the name of the game, not winning. And Jack goes on, Julian Assange is in jail and Cheney is on his fifth heart and enjoying a barbecue. Is he still around, Cheney? Peter Stevenson says, the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. What? I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really? Did the Taliban win in Afghanistan? Yes, 84, that's down 1. B, no, 16, that's up 1. Who are the 16 that think that the Taliban did not win the war in Afghanistan? Did we get Ian in Hounslow? Let's hear from him.
Hello.
Ian, go ahead, sir.
Hello, George.
Hi.
It's about this unfolding story of infanticide in Canada.
Isn't it an incredible story?
It's awful, but now the Canadian government has attacked China over its supposed oppression of the Uyghur minority, and yet it's guilty of this heinous crime.
Yeah, actually, the Canadian government is guilty of many crimes, not the least of which is the illegal arrest of the chief finance officer of Huawei, the daughter of the founder of Huawei, that it holds in home arrest, house arrest, at the behest of the Donald Trump administration. Nice and liberal, that, isn't it?
But they've been joined by Australia, who nearly wiped out their Aborigines, and the USA, who tried to exterminate the Native Americans, and they've got the brass neck to have a go at China.
Yeah, especially as what they're saying about China is false. But what we're saying about Canada is admitted by them to be true.
Absolutely, and the neoliberal shrills on the neoliberal radio stations are screaming through their microphones with xenophobia, which is bad enough of COVID, Oriental people being harassed. And it's whipped up, and they're ignoring the calls like from myself, the call screening, pointing out the hypocrisy of the West towards China.
Yep. I haven't seen that Canada story anywhere else other than on RT. Ian, thanks for that call, calling out the hypocrisy of our rulers and their scribes. Vinny is in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Vinny.
Yo, George, I love you, mate.
Thank you, sir.
I'll ask you a couple of questions, mate. Yeah.
How's the football going? Is it still 1-1?
Yeah. I'm with you, mate. Listen, why is the England team taking a knee for a criminal?
Well, we've had that discussion before. I don't think they are taking it for a criminal. It may have started that way before they knew he was a criminal. It was in solidarity with black people who are disproportionately victims of unfair, unjust, often murderous policing. And although Floyd may well, indeed was rather a criminal, that doesn't mean he wasn't cruelly murdered in plain sight.
Yes, well, what about the lockdown coming on the 15th of July because of the leaked report? There's a leaked report. It's coming out on the 15th of July. They're saying they're going to lock down everything.
No, I don't think. I think the lockdown's coming to an end, Vinny. I think you're being pessimistic. I see no prospect of people. Look at them on the screen. There's no lockdown coming for them. I think the genie's out of the bottle, Vinny. Nobody's gonna lock down again, son.
The football, they had to let the football go on. They had no choice. But what they did is what is going on. The football they can't stop the football, right? So now, in 3 days, they're going to do another lockdown. Go on.
No, not at all. You come back next week and we'll discuss how wrong you are. Vinny, thanks for the call in any case. Tarif is in New Orleans. Who wouldn't want to go to New Orleans? Go ahead, Tarif.
Thanks for taking my call, George. Free Journal Science, free Derninger. Okay, this is about Haiti and geopolitics dealing with China.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Jeremy Puri and James Horn from out of Houston, they was discussing things about Haiti, and also by me watching, learning about geopolitics. Okay, the president, the guy that's taking the place of the assassinated president, he was supposed to leave office this week, and he was supposed to have elections this year. The U.S. told Haiti that he's going to stay prime minister, president until 2026, basically going past the Haitian, messing over the Haitian Constitution. I was informed by watching this program dealing with Jimmy Puri, a professor from UCLA. She was talking about the U.S. contract with Cuba is almost up for Guantanamo Bay, and they might take the Navy that's posted there and bring it to Haiti. Haiti have 3 islands that's off the coast of it that it owns. That's sovereign land. And the island that's in the middle called Genovese might become the next home of the U.S. Navy fleet.
That's very interesting. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that one before. That's very interesting.
Yes, yes. So what the Haitians have to do, they have to go to the different countries around the world, and they have to try to stop this from happening, or to make sure they don't get messed over, and they won't have to sign no 100-year lease for to United States to lease the land out for 100 years, or even sell it. You know, that guy that is taking over, he's not elected. You know,
no,
US,
actually, even the president who was murdered had long outstayed his mandate. The prime minister that's now prime minister today had resigned, and his resignation accepted. So he's an imposter too. Actually, there's only, I think, 6 elected officials in the whole country of Haiti. The rest of them are illegitimately holding positions for one reason or another. Tarif, we'll keep an eye on that story for you. Thanks for the call. Chris is in Nottingham. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Chris.
Hello, George. I'm just phoning up to say how surprised I was that Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who I've enjoyed listening to in the past, suddenly seems to have changed his tune and seemed to be saying that we've been saved from COVID and that there's no need for any more restrictions and we don't need masks anymore and we've all been saved. But that's a completely different picture from the one that I recognise from what I've been reading in the press over the last 3 or 4 days.
Do tell then. Give us your take on it.
Right, well, I'll give you my take. The first article I can recall reading was by Anthony Costello, who is a professor of global health at UCL, and he said that it's stupid to try and make us live with the virus when only 50% of the population has been vaccinated.
No, 93% of the population has the antibodies of COVID-19, either through vaccination or having been infected by it. So 93% is a very big number. It's quite clear that however many cases there are per day, it is not leading to a dramatic spike in hospitalization, still less a dramatic spike in death. So the calculus changes, Chris. When facts change, one's opinions must also change. Last word to you.
I disagree with you, George.
Go ahead.
Because according to yesterday's figures, there were 2,700 hospitalizations, which was 2,700, which was up by 800 from the previous day. So we've got a new strain that's skyrocketing. Hospitalizations are up by 33%.
Well, they are up, but they're in no danger at this moment of overwhelming the health service. What is the case is that 13 million people are now on NHS waiting lists for treatment that they haven't been able to get because the whole health service has been given over to COVID.
That's right. And when these hospitalizations increase dramatically, as they're going to do in the next few weeks, we're going to have all these people who are waiting for operations and who are not going to be able to get them because there's going to be more and more COVID cases. So I'll be interested to see on your show what Ranjeet Brar has got to say in another 3 weeks.
So will we all. But I can tell you in advance that if the facts change, so will his opinions. He's not a dogmatist. He's not a dogmatist, Chris.
Okay, last thing, he didn't mention long COVID. 1 million people in this country have got long COVID, which lasts for as much as a year in many instances. He didn't mention it at all, including 30,000 children have got long COVID at this very moment.
Okay, Chris, it's a game of opinions. Thanks very much indeed. Mike is in Stoke-on-Trent. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, George.
Hi.
We don't see an awful lot in the press, I don't think, about where our forces are abroad.
Mm.
Now, we heard a lot about that Black Sea thing the other day.
Yeah.
Did I see there's an aircraft, or there's something happening in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Yeah, there is something in the Eastern Mediterranean. There's something in the South China Sea. There's what's going on in the Black Sea. There's NATO war games and all the rest. So you're right, they're moved around and nobody ever asks in Parliament, which is the only place you could get a proper official answer, of course. When I was in Parliament, these kind of questions were asked all the time, but nobody in Parliament seems to be asking them these days.
So what are we doing in the Eastern Mediterranean, then? Is it Syria?
Of course. It's Syria, we're in the Black Sea threatening Russia, we're in the South China Sea threatening China, even though the Russian and Chinese Navy could sink all of our ships in an instant, in a puff of smoke. It is reckless adventurism by an emaciated military force, in the case of Britain, for no reason that I can fathom. None.
Well, is the story that we're supposed to be bombing ISIS in Syria? I mean, are we really doing that, or are we...
Well, we stopped bombing, but of course we're supporting ISIS in Syria. We're supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria. We're supporting the alphabet soup of extremism in Syria. Everybody knows that. Mike, I've got to press on because of the hour. Ted in Bradwell is next. Go ahead, Ted.
Hello, George. You're on fire. It's wonderful to have this show, the resource of this show, to be able to connect with every week.
Thank you.
And thanks for taking the call.
Welcome.
Now, it was great to hear Alex Mihailovich talking about the residential schools, a subject very close to our hearts here. We have a little setup we call Peace Place, and it's a little bit of a community that gets together and share a concern on, and one of our concerns is this issue of the residential schools. About 10 years ago, we had somebody come and speak to us about the residential schools, the Reverend Kevin Annett, who, at his first ministerial appointment in British Columbia, came across this story, this bit of history at he started to ask his church elders, why do we not have any of the tribal people, the natives, the Indians coming? He said he was told, no, don't worry about it. We leave them alone. But he befriended people, and gradually this story started to come to light, and he was incredulous. One man said, well, we'd like you to marry us, but I'm not going in that church. Why would I go there when so many of my school friends are buried behind, the back of the building? Anyway, he got enough evidence to bring this to light. He was defrocked from the church. Now his name is Kevin Annett, and I really hope you get him in as a guest on the show.
I will. I have spoken to him before, and it's a good suggestion, Ted. I promise that we will do so. I've got to clear the decks, though. It's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Norma.
Hello, George. I really haven't really listened to very much of the programme because I'm watching the football. But, it's awful at the moment. They're going to have extra time. I was so happy, then I was nervous, now I'm worried. And if it goes to penalties, what's it going to be like?
Well, my prediction is 2-1 England in extra time. But from what I have heard from people coming in and out of the studio is that Italy are dominating now.
Yeah, they've gone after Boyle.
And more, seem more likely to score. I hope it doesn't go to penalties.
Well,
that would just be agonising, Norma.
Well, it's not good for people as old as me.
Or even as old as me.
No,
I
no,
could
no,
not watch England in a penalty shootout in the final of the Euros.
Anyway, we'll just have to see, won't we?
Well, look, what you must do, Norma, is listen back to the show tomorrow when you've recovered from the game.
I can do that easy, yeah.
It's awfully kind of you to break off from the game and call us. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. It was much easier than I anticipated that it would be. I thought we'd have a kind of non-show, given what's going on at Wembley. But we have had, I think, a thoroughly worthwhile one. If you agree with me, then please come back next week at the same time in the same place and bring someone else with you. Our audience has grown and grown and grown, and our year-long climb up the ratings is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I hope it was also for you. Good night.